Dear colleagues, we will start in a few seconds. Please take your seats. So, let's start the plenary session of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in Vancouver. And this session is supposed to go on until 6 o'clock in the evening. And it's supposed to start 3 o'clock, and it's almost 5 minutes past, and we have a very, very long agenda. So I will open the meeting now. Good that you're here. Thank you. So call to order. And number 1, the adoption of the agenda. So dear colleagues, please take your seats. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and is being broadcasted on the OSCE PA social media platform and website. A reversed draft agenda for this meeting has been distributed. Are there any objections? I don't see so. The agenda is adopted. Before we proceed, let me remind all members that the speakers list for the open general debate and the supplementary items are closed. I will not add members to these speaking lists. There will be an opportunity to respond to reports on OSCE PA activities. To facilitate the conduct of the meeting, please signal your request to speak to the advisors at the podium. And it's only to the advisors. Thank you. And then go further on. Consideration of supplementary item. We will continue with the consideration of supplementary items allocated to the plenary by the Standing Committee on Friday. Today, we will consider supplementary item number 12 on rising anti-Semitism in the OSCE region, sponsored by Senator Ben Cardin. Let me remind you that this text has been allocated to the plenary under the procedure outlined in Rule 21(3). This means that this item cannot be amended and that there will be no debate. Before we move to the consideration of supplementary item 12, Senator Cardin will first present his report, a special representative, on anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance. Members who had signed up in advance to debate supplementary item 12 will be given the opportunity to comment. After this, we will move on to the report by the special representative on gender issue, Dr. Heidi Fry, followed by the consideration of the supplementary item number 14 on gender consequences of armed conflicts. Again, let me underline that the speakers list for the debate on supplementary item 14 is closed. And yeah, good. Yes. And now move on to number 2.1. Report by Ben Cardin, Special Representative on Anti-Semitism, Racism and Intolerance, followed by consideration of supplementary item number 12 on rising anti-Semitism in the OSCE region under Rule 21.3. Let us now begin with a report by the Special Representative on Anti-Semitism, Racism and Intolerance. Senator Ben Cardin, you have the floor. The floor is yours, sir.
Madam President, thank you very much. Once again, on behalf of the U.S. delegation, I want to thank our Canadian hosts for an incredible week. Last night was a wonderful evening that we had to celebrate the Parliamentary Assembly, and we thank them for their hospitality. I also want to thank you and the Standing Committee for allowing this report to be given along with the supplementary item on the rise of anti-Semitism in the OSCE region. Madam Chair, I have issued a written report as the Special Representative on Anti-Semitism, Racism, and Intolerance of the activities that have been done during this past year. It includes the meetings and events, the letters, the statements and speeches and legislative efforts that we've made over the past year in order to deal with the concerns of anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance. I'm not going to go through that full report. And in the interest of time, I'm going to combine my report with the debate on the supplementary item because I think they're pretty much the same. And I'll be able to then go directly to the debate on it from the other members without any additional time that I will need. I also want to point out that we just completed a side event on countering the rise of anti-Semitism and other hate-based incidents, government actions, and leadership. I want to thank the ODIHR for his presentation at that particular meeting, Mr. Susan Heller Pinto of the ADL, and Andrew Baker, the Special Representative of the Chair in Office for Anti-Semitism. The alarms have been ringing loud and clear for years about an extremely disturbing rise of anti-Semitism and related hate-based incidents. For the past several years, organizations like the Anti-Defamation League have recorded increasingly higher and higher numbers of anti-Semitic incidents of harassment, vandalism, and assault. Anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance is clearly on the rise across the OSCE region. I continue to be concerned that some popular entertainers and public figures are spreading anti-Semitic tropes to their followers on social media or through public statements. It is alarming that such disinformation, conspiracy theories, and hate speech can be disseminated so quickly and globally through the use of today's digital technology to their followers. Madam President, this has been intensified by the anti-Semitic attacks made by the Russian Federation in its war of aggression against Ukraine, indicating it's part of the denazification of Ukraine, adding to oxygen to those who want to spread hate. We must speak out loudly and clearly against anti-Semitism when it occurs. As leaders in government, politics, and society, we must lead the fight against hate. We cannot allow anti-Semitism or any other type of prejudice or intolerance to be normalized. The spread of anti-Semitic and intolerant disinformation and conspiracy theories also threatens to undermine our democratic institutions as they attack the veracity of the government and mainstream media. Over the last 20 years, the OSCE has developed its work to address anti-Semitism, both in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and on the government side. Participating states have adopted many of the OSCE commitments to prevent anti-Semitism, and OSCE institutions, particularly ODIHR, have developed tools to assist states in implementing them, including hate crimes database, practical guidelines and handbooks, educational materials, and police training programs. I urge all of you to avail yourselves of the assistance that the OSCE can offer, particularly educational material and police training. The U.S. Helsinki Commission held a hearing late last year on what we can do about the rise of anti-Semitism. The major recommendation that came out of that hearing is that we need a coordinated national strategy involving all stakeholders to combat anti-Semitism. As leaders, we must lead. As parliamentarians, we must act. In May, at the urging of the Congress and others, the Biden-Harris administration issued its first ever U.S. national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. We have copies of that available to all the members of the Assembly. I want to thank those countries that have already adopted national strategies and shared their lessons learned with the United States as we work to develop our own. The U.S. strategy is a whole society national strategy that sets forth an aggressive agenda for dealing with both the symptoms and root causes of such hate. At its core are education and solidarity. It builds around 4 pillars: increasing awareness and understanding of anti-Semitism, improving safety and security for Jewish communities, reversing the normalization of anti-Semitism and countering anti-Semitic discrimination, and building cross-community solidarity and collective action to counter hate. I might point out that in the United States, we have a special representative at the ambassador level to combat anti-Semitism in Ambassador Lipstadt. I urge all of you to work to develop a similar national strategy in your country if it does not already exist. We all must work towards a common goal of ensuring that no one is harassed, harmed, or hated because of their faith. Anti-Semitism does not exist in vacuum. We must embrace a robust partnership among communities that have been victimized by such hate and renew our resolve to stand united as truth-tellers and educators. I urge my colleagues to support the supplemental resolution. I am proud there's been no amendments. We have broad co-sponsorship among so many of the states. I am proud to present it, and I urge the adoption.
Thank you very much, Senator Ben Cardin. I do also wish to thank you for your work you have done as special representative on anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance. Thank you for this. I will now continue with the debate. And I have 5 members who have signed up for the debate on supplementary item number 12. And who will have the opportunity to comment on the report. I will first call on Dr. Heidi Fry from Canada to have the floor. He will be followed by Ms. Sachs from Canada. Dr. Heidi Fry, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I really want to congratulate Senator Cardin. He took on this role as a representative in 2015, and he is actually focused clearly and distinctly on issues of hate, intolerance, violence, and discrimination in the OSCE region. This particular SI on anti-Semitism is not something just to look at in the United States. It is pervasive around the world. In Canada, we have seen a rise in anti-Semitism in recent years. We've had to actually create a special envoy to look at Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism within Canada. But what I think is important and we saw the President Biden bring forward a national strategy against anti-Semitism. I think our envoy in Canada makes a very important statement. He says, anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine. It tells us that the danger is going to begin. It tells us that hate against other groups, whether they're Islamophobia, whether they are blacks, whether they're indigenous people, whether they're LGBTQ, this is all about hate, intolerance. And we need to be able to not just talk about it, to not just stand against it. We need to have a strategic plan in this region for it. This region knows about what anti-Semitism can do. It remembers Nazi Germany. And yet, while that is a fact and we can look at that, let us look at how disinformation is pervasive. We see Russia suggesting that they're warring against Ukraine because they want to denazify us. This is why discrimination, disinformation happens, especially online. We see that escalation, not just of words, but of violence, of personal attacks, bombing of synagogues around the world. This is something we need to see as a clear sign that we must be on guard, not only against anti-Semitism, but that it is the beginning of what's continuing in this region. Hate, fascism, the rise in this kind of discrimination. So I want to support this SI. I want to say thank you again to Ben Cardin for what I consider to be excellent work, and I hope that you will support the SI. I hope that you will support it in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi Fry. Next speaker is Ms. Yara Sachs from Canada. She will be followed by Mr. Andrew Gwynn from United Kingdom. Ms. Yara Sachs, the floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you, President Sitterfeld, and thank you to colleagues. Dear friends, colleagues, I'd like to thank Senator Cardin for his work as Special Representative and for proposing the supplementary item on rising anti-Semitism in the OSCE region, and also to thank ODIHR for its work. As Senator Cardin's work indicates, there's been an alarming increase in anti-Semitic attacks and rhetoric, including Holocaust denial and distortions across the OSCE region, and that includes Russian propaganda imbued with Holocaust distortion throughout the unprovoked and aggressive war in Ukraine. In the U.S. alone, the Anti-Defamation League recorded nearly 3,700 incidents of anti-Semitic harassment, vandalism, and assault in 2022 alone, at an increase of 36% over 2021. That is a sobering number. Anti-Semitism remains a serious concern in Canada as well. B'nai B'rith Canada indicates that the number of reported anti-Semitic incidents in Canada has more than doubled in the past decade. Globally speaking, the anti-Semitism that we're witnessing today is increasingly happening online and moving at warp speed as digital technology and social media have provided new ways of disseminating anti-Semitic disinformation, conspiracy theories, and hate speech across the globe. Furthermore, the proliferation of anti-Semitism can desensitize our societies to the public to hate speech. We must speak out clearly against anti-Semitism whenever and wherever it occurs to ensure that it never becomes normalized. This is critically important because while anti-Semitism most directly affects the Jewish community, and I speak to you all here today not only as a Canadian parliamentarian, but as a member of my Jewish community, it embodies the kind of hatred that threatens us all. As Senator Cardin's SI urges, all OSCE participating states should enhance their efforts to combat anti-Semitism and promote tolerance and non-discrimination. ODIHR has provided critical tools to lead in this fight against hate, anti-Semitism, and discrimination. Please use them. Encourage your parliaments to take part in this process of fighting against hate. I wish to applaud the Biden administration for the release of the first ever U.S. national strategy to counter anti-Semitism just over a month ago. Colleagues, the work continues. The strategy underscores the need to counter anti-Semitic disinformation and to build cross-community solidarity to counter hate. I would add that it is cross-country, it is cross-community, and it is across parliaments that we must do this work together. In 2020, Canada appointed a special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism for the purpose of promoting Holocaust remembrance and education and combating anti-Semitism, hatred, and racism. In the context of rising anti-Semitism across the OSCE region, we, as members of the OSCPA, must strengthen our collective efforts to fight back against hate speech and advance inclusive public policy. In Canada, we often say diversity is our strength. Diversity isn't a fact, but inclusivity is a choice. As we all work together, I would encourage all of us to support this work and to continue forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yara Sachs. Next speaker is Mr. Andrew Gwynn from United Kingdom. He will be followed by Mr. Birger Turanisan from Iceland. Mr. Andrew Gwynn, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Madam President, and it's a pleasure to be speaking in support of this motion tabled by Senator Cardin of the United States of America. Madam President, earlier this year, I was invited to Auschwitz-Birkenau as part of the UK delegation on the March of the Living. Over the course of 4 days, I and the other delegates met with Holocaust survivors, and we were shown the death camps built to carry out the murder of 6 million Jews and those who didn't fit into the vile ideology of the Nazis. To call the experience harrowing is an understatement. The horrors of the Holocaust are just beyond comprehension. They serve as a reminder of what happens when politics is weaponized by hate and bigotry. As this item rightly outlines, we all have a duty to call out anti-Semitism in our daily lives and to pass on these principles to future generations. In a similar way to Senator Cardin, I'm incredibly concerned about rising cases of anti-Semitism across the OSCE region. In the United Kingdom, anti-Semitic incidents hit a record high last year, a 34% increase from 2020. And I know that many other OSCE members have seen similar trends in their respective countries over recent years. In the face of this increase, it is vital that we all, as OSCE members, unanimously reaffirm our commitment to tackling anti-Semitism, racism and discrimination. Recently, I read an NBC interview with the Holocaust survivor Sonia Klein. At the age of 94, Sonia said the following words, and I quote, "Those who play with nationalism, nativism and racism, they're playing with fire. They're playing with our lives." That sentence stayed with me. On the March of the Living, I repeatedly heard the phrase, "never again." Never again must we allow anti-Semitism to go unchecked. Never again should we be passive in the face of hatred and bigotry. Never again should we tolerate anti-Semitism in our political culture or in our public life. The OSCE, which represents more than 1 billion people across the globe, must stand resolutely against the disease of anti-Semitism and work proactively in our national governments to eradicate it. Above all, we must all show that never again is more than words. It is deeds too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew Quinn. Next speaker is Mr. Birger Thorarinsson from Iceland. He will be followed by Ms. Valérie Boyer from France. Mr. Birger Thorarinsson, the floor is yours, sir.
Madam President, I would like to start by thanking Senator Cardin for his excellent and important work. I would like to pay attention to the annual Anti-Semitism Worldwide Report. The report demonstrates a significant increase in various types of anti-Semitic incidents in the most countries with large Jewish populations. The report suggests that the number of anti-Semitic incidents in the world was directly impacted by 2 major events: the conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza in May 2021. Then we had the COVID-19 pandemic, where conspiracy theories flourished, such that the COVID-19 virus had been engineered and spread by Israel and the Jews. Recent surveys in North America and Europe have documented that long-standing anti-Semitic tropes are alive and well. Madam President, despite the extensive efforts and resources invested in combating anti-Semitism in recent years, the phenomenon is on the rise, resulting many Jewish people are leaving Europe because they flee increasingly and feel increasingly unsafe. 9 out of 10 Jews in Europe see anti-Semitism as a serious problem. We have to take this seriously. We have to act. More conferences don't help. The rapidly expanding digital world has enabled these violent messages to circulate fast around the world. As the internet, followed by social media, became more and more popular, they became vehicles for spreading anti-Semitism sentiment to the masses. Dr. Robert Roset, historian at Vad Vasem in Jerusalem, said that the struggle against anti-Semitism requires a toolbox approach, tackling it from multiple angles: legal recourse, more rigorous policing of the internet and social media, building bridges between religious groups, and of course, education. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can change the world, Nelson Mandela said. We must use Holocaust as a tool for combating anti-Semitism. We must ensure that memory and meanings of the Holocaust continue to be relevant, but also to use this comprehensive knowledge and carefully develop educational tools to fight contemporary forms of anti-Semitism. We see education as a long-term and perhaps most profound tool in our battle against modern-day anti-Semitism, Dr. Rosell notes, and we believe it is in this area that we can be most effective. The Assembly must encourage all member states to put more effort into education when it comes to combating anti-Semitism. We as legislators must all do our job in preventing hate crimes.
Thank you, Mr. Birger Thorarinsson. Last speaker is Ms. Valérie Boyer from France. The floor is yours, Madame.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci, mes chers collègues. Permettez-moi, comme mes collègues, de remercier notre collègue Ben Garden pour ce rapport particulièrement intéressant sur l'antisémitisme. Si je m'exprime auprès de vous aujourd'hui, c'est en tant que parlementaire française, et non en tant que représentante d'une religion ou d'une communauté, parce que je pense que l'antisémitisme est une cause universelle et qui doit tous nous rassembler. Je me permets de vous inviter, comme ça a été le cas tout à l'heure par d'autres collègues, à vous rendre, comme j'ai pu le faire à plusieurs reprises, à Yad Vashem. Mais permettez-moi de vous parler de la France, puisque aujourd'hui, il s'agit de lutter contre l'antisémitisme dans la zone OSCE. La France qui pourtant est dotée de lois puissantes pour lutter contre l'antisémitisme, mais néanmoins, récemment, nous avons eu des chiffres particulièrement alarmants. En 2021, 589 actes antisémites ont été recensés, soit plus 75%, dont des violences physiques qui ont augmenté de plus 36%. Autre chose particulièrement alarmant, vous avez tous entendu parler, je vous remercie de vos mots de solidarité, sur les émeutes qui ont eu lieu en France. Eh bien, il faut que vous sachiez que lors de ces émeutes, nous avons eu des phrases particulièrement alarmantes qui ont été taguées, c'est-à-dire imprimées avec du feutre ou des bombes sur le mémorial de la Libération, et je les cite, « Racaille policière de Sainte-Soline à Nanterre » et aussi des mots disant « Sale chienne, nous allons te faire une nouvelle Shoah ». Pour vous dire combien ce rapport est important et combien sur la zone OSCE, c'est un sujet essentiel dont on doit se saisir et s'en occuper. Les problèmes de négationnisme ne sont pas des problèmes malheureusement anciens et il faut aujourd'hui tout mettre en œuvre pour que ces problèmes d'antisémitisme puissent être réglés sur la zone OSCE. Et permettez-moi de conclure en vous faisant une réflexion. Il y a peut-être des endroits où il n'y a pas d'actes antisémites recensés. Mais peut-être parce que les choses sont pires, parce qu'il n'y a pas de juifs qui peuvent vivre tranquillement dans ces pays, où ils ont dû partir du fait du racisme et des discriminations dont ils ont fait l'objet. Cette situation est particulièrement alarmante et je remercie notre Assemblée de cette saisie de ce sujet majeur.
Thank you, Ms. Valérie Boyer. Now I will give the floor to Senator Ben Cardin to respond on the remarks. Mr. Senator Ben Cardin, the floor is yours.
Well, Madam President, let me thank our colleagues. I'm so proud of the work that the parliamentary has done on tolerance. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly is known for many things, but its real hallmark to me has been in promoting human rights and tolerance throughout the OSCE region as a model for the world. We recognize we have a problem today, but we are committed to making sure that we do everything we can for the safety of our communities. We recognize diversity as a strength, and I think that is reflected in the work that we've done during this Vancouver meeting. I am proud to be associated with the comments of my colleagues in support of this resolution, and I urge our colleagues to adopt it.
Thank you, Mr. Senator. Now move further on to the formal consideration of supplementary item number 12. Please be reminded that the supplementary item 12 received no amendments and is being consideration under Rule 21(3). This means that no further amendments can be tabled. I will now give Senator Benkardin 1 minute to advance the proposed text, and then I will give 1 minute for a member against if anyone wants to have the floor, and it will be followed by a vote. Senator Benkardin, the floor is yours for 1 minute. Thank you.
Once again, I thank the Assembly for their attention to this issue. I think we've explained it very well, and I would hope it would be accepted.
Thank you, Senator. I now open the floor if there is a delegate who wants to have the floor to speak against the supplementary item. I don't recognize anybody asking for the floor. So let's continue. And let's go on to the next. We will now formally move to a vote on the draft resolution. Would those in favor of adopting the draft resolution please raise the voting card? Thank you. You may take down your card. And I do ask those who would like to vote against to raise your voting card. Thank you. Any abstention? Please raise your card. No. The draft resolution is unanimously adopted. And before we move to point 2.1, I have heard that there is one of our colleagues who is not home with her family celebrating her birthday. She is celebrating her birthday here in beautiful Vancouver at the OSCE annual session. Ms. Barbara Bartos, head of the Polish delegation.
Madam President, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Barbara. A warm congratulations to you from all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
And now, let's move further on to number 2.1, report by Dr. Heidi Fry, Special Representative on Gender Issues, followed by consideration of supplementary item number 14 on gender consequences of armed conflicts. Let's continue with a report by the Special Representative on Gender Issues. This will be followed by the consideration of supplementary item number 14. And I remind you that the list for debate on supplementary item 14 is closed. Members, however, have the opportunity to take the floor in response to Dr. Heidi Fry's report. Please signal interest in advance. Speakers will have 3 minutes. Dr. Heidi Fry, the floor is yours, madam.
Thank you again, Madam President. I'm not going to go through my report. It's outside somewhere. You can get it. It's a nice and thick report, so you can read it at your leisure before you go to bed tonight. I just wanted to let you know that my job as gender representative is to promote gender equality across the region. Of course, this is something that is very difficult because it's not a balance of gender equity achieved fully, but we're getting there. And I wanted to say that one of the things we did this year that's improving our ability to get to this place of gender equality is I have created an informal gender network. Now, the word is gender network. It means men can join. because we are not going to promote equality for gender if we don't have men at the table. So I have a few men in my gender network. It is the gender network was created to talk about, to raise issues, to talk about red flags, to say we should be focusing on this year, etc. It is out of that network that came the idea of looking at the gender impacts of armed conflicts. Now, we've heard everyone talk about this. It is pretty clear. We saw during COVID-19 that there was a disproportionate impact on women, especially during COVID. They lost their jobs. They were first to lose jobs. The economic impact was significant. They were the ones who were at home, and if there was domestic violence, there were increased risk for domestic violence. What we're seeing is the same thing in armed conflict. 90% of refugees currently and displaced persons from the illegal war of Russia in Ukraine are women and children. And these women are going to other countries that are totally displaced from their homes. They're also subject to violence. They're subject to sexual violence is a huge impact on these women. And rape is something that we have heard very clearly are promoted by Russian soldiers. This means that when women go to other places as refugees, the neighboring states have a duty to provide good health care for them, whether it's prenatal, postnatal, interpartum care, whether it's care to get access to safe abortion if needed, whether it is the ability to help them to survive the post-traumatic stress disorder of war. So we need to focus on healthcare services for women, especially who are the displaced people in this war. I also wanted to say that there are ways we have to look at helping women when they move forward. We have to spend more money as nations on humanitarian aid, because we give arms, we're helping at the armed conflict, but we need to look at humanitarian aid, especially for women. And so I wanted to also point out to you that in the report, there are some best practices. There are some states that are doing extremely good work on providing the needs that women have. But there's a high risk as well of women as a result of armed conflict being at a high risk of trafficking. And we need to look at how we prevent that. We need to look at how we ensure that women are safe from trafficking. And so this is in the report. I won't go into it in great detail. And we also have to look at accountability for crimes of sexual violence against women. Not simply to say it's a bad thing, we don't like it, it's a crime against humanity. We have to suggest that the perpetrators must be brought to justice. And this is something that is part of what I'm encouraging us to do, not just to talk about things, not just to agree with each other, but to actually move forward, to act, to make things happen, to make things change. And I want to also press and push for United Nations Resolution 1325. If we have women at the table preventing war, negotiating peace, and being able to have a say in what happens during conflict, and then rebuilding after conflict, we will find that we will get best practices, we will be able to safeguard women and support them throughout conflict. I'm sorry, I'm having my allergies giving me trouble, and I'm having a difficult time speaking, so forgive me. You know I never had a hard time speaking on this before, so excuse me, I'm sorry.
I say thank you very much, Dr. Heidi Fry. I do also say thank you so much for your fantastic work, year by year, a special representative on gender issues. I think you should be very proud of the work that you are doing and have done. Thank you. Now, I will go further on the speakers list. And there is one speaker on the list, and it's Mr. Francesco Sorbara from Canada. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, President. Thank you to my dear colleague and friend, Dr. Fry, for your presentation for another informative gender report. The subject of your report this year, the gendered consequences of the war in Ukraine, is one of critical importance. As we know, women account for the vast majority of Ukrainian refugees and internally displaced persons. Dr. Fry's reports highlights how women and girls in Ukraine, as well as those who have been forced to flee the country, face specific and disproportionate challenges with regards to food security, economic hardship, and access to health care, including mental health services. A recent survey by UNICEF underscores that Ukrainian refugees are experiencing higher severe levels of psychological distress owing to fears about the safety of their families and practical concerns about money, housing, and access to childcare. Women have also borne the brunt of the economic impact of the war. As Dr. Fry points out in her report, the war has exacerbated pre-existing economic inequalities facing women and put women at greater risk of poverty. Furthermore, many women have become the sole breadwinners and caregivers in their families, increasing their financial vulnerability. These are only some of the gendered consequences of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, an illegal, barbaric, and brutal war of choice on the Ukrainian state and its people. We also know that the war has exposed women to heightened risks of conflict-related sexual violence. International organizations and processes, including the United Nations Human Rights Office and the Moscow Mechanism mission of experts, have verified numerous instances of conflict-related sexual violence, including rape against Ukrainian women and girls by Russian forces. UN Women has also indicated that the war has heightened the risk of human trafficking, especially in the border regions where displaced persons are transiting. As Dr. Fry indicates in her report, to respond to these complex challenges, OSCE participating states should incorporate gender perspectives as a part of their humanitarian support for Ukraine. I also support Dr. Fry's call for governments to adopt an approach that is centered around the needs of survivors, including by ensuring that displaced persons in and outside of Ukraine have access to sexual and reproductive care. In conclusion, colleagues, this report makes a valuable contribution to the body of research on the gender consequences of armed conflict and is an important tool that policymakers can use, and I would say must, to support a gender-inclusive response to the war in Ukraine. I would like to thank my dear colleague and friend, Dr. Fry, for drawing our attention to important gender-related issues each year and for all her efforts to advance gender equality in the OSCE region. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Francesco Sobara. I now call on Dr. Heidi Fry to respond. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you again. I hope I can speak. I'm going to try. I want to thank everyone for their support. I had no one debating and adding amendments to my report, or debating and adding amendments to my SI, which I'm going to deal with in a few minutes. So thank you for your support and for the evolution that I have seen in this Parliamentary Assembly in terms of looking at issues of gender in a very factual, responsive way. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi Fry. We will now move on to supplementary item number 14. I will give the floor to Dr. Heidi Fry to present supplementary item 14. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You have my SI. I have discussed what the reasons are for putting forward this SI. I have discussed I want to point you to the recommendations on the SI, which is the most important thing. You've heard me speak during this whole conference about all of the data, all of the information, but we cannot gather data if we do not have sex disaggregated data in all of our nation states. We've got to know what we're dealing with before we can talk about it. So that's the first thing that we're recommending. The second thing we're recommending is, again, to look at humanitarian aid so that there is an ability to have health services and safety for women. We want a survivor-based approach. Women do not want to be victims. We are survivors. We want to have the tools to help us survive all of the things that we face in an armed conflict. And I also think it's important for us to be assured about healthcare. And by healthcare, I mean the full range of sexual and reproductive health services for women, no matter where they go. This is something we must offer. It's an absolute necessity for good healthcare services to be given to women, including access to safe abortion when necessary, especially among women who have been raped. And so I wanted to press those recommendations for you in this item to see what are the things we need to do, and to ask you to not only talk about accepting a United Nations Resolution 1325, but to do something about it. I want to see these states bringing forward women in the process, starting from preventing conflict to negotiating peace and to being able to rebuild societies after conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi Fry. Now we will proceed to the debate on supplementary item number 14. I have 3 members registered to speak. There is a 3 minutes time limit. I will first call on Senator F. Gigi Osler from Canada. He will be followed by Mr. Pavlo Frolov from Ukraine. Senator F. Gigi Osler, the floor is yours, sir.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Firstly, I would like to thank my colleague, the indomitable Dr. Heidi Fry, for sponsoring this supplementary item on the gendered and intersectional impacts of armed conflicts. This SI acknowledges that women are disproportionately at risk of direct and indirect harm in armed conflict situations. Around the world, including in the OSCE region, we are seeing increased tensions and a rising number of armed conflicts in which civilians are targeted. I do not have to remind this audience that intentionally attacking civilians is a clear violation of international humanitarian law, and that armed conflicts have gendered consequences. Whether it is the use of sexual and gender-based violence as a weapon of war, or discrimination in the context of forced displacement, the consequences exacerbate already unequal gender relations and increase the harms of family separation, mental health repercussions, and exploitation. The use of sexual violence is a war crime under international humanitarian law. It has devastating consequences for women and others who are affected, directly or indirectly. That is why it is so important that OSCE participating states adopt a survivor-centered approach when responding to conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence. The SI urges the collection of disaggregated data to help guide policy discussions and decisions. It recalls that humanitarian assistance needs to be sensitive to gender, age, and intersectionality to be truly effective. And it calls on OSCE participating states that are hosting refugees and displaced persons to ensure access to health care. And that means access to a full range of universal and affordable sexual and reproductive health and rights services. The SI recognizes the importance of ensuring the full participation of women and gender-diverse people in conflict prevention, conflict resolution, and peace building. Lastly, it encourages monitoring the national institutions relevant to security and defense sectors to assess if they are meeting their commitments to the women, peace, and security agenda. Chers collègues, addressing the gendered consequences of armed conflicts is an issue of critical importance, and I urge you to support this supplementary item. Thank you, miigwech.
Thank you, Senator Ms. F. Gigi Osler. Next speaker on my list is, instead of Mr. Pavlo Frolov, Ms. Irina Gerashenko from Ukraine. He will be followed by Ms. Natalia Pipa from Ukraine. Ms. Irina Gerashenko, the floor is yours, madam.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for this very, very important report. The war of Ukraine started by the Russian Federation began 8 years ago. Back then, the war did not take the Russian threat seriously, and now we see the consequences. Ukraine seeks peace, but we did not start this war. The security situation in Ukraine is dear. Daily shelling of peaceful cities and killed of Ukrainian continue. Children in Ukraine are born, study, and sleep in bomb shelter. Occupy commit sexual crimes. The youngest victim of sexual crimes was 4 years old, and the older was 85. Women are actively participated in the struggle for independence and the restoration of Ukraine. Currently, over 60,000 Ukrainian women are serving in the armed forces. Women work in the rear and volunteer. Military, medical, mostly women serve the wounded on a daily basis. Many Ukrainian women join the army due to the loss of their husband or son. Ukrainian women, both civilian and military personnel, remain in Russian captivity. We are fighting for their liberation. The role of Ukrainian women in the future victory will be significant. It's very important to representative women in the peace negotiation. 5 years I was representative Ukraine in humanitarian Minsk group. I support liberation our prisoners. I think it's very important role of Ukrainian women in the process on reconstruction and peace negotiation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Irina Gerachenko. Next speaker on my list is Ms. Natalia Pipa from Ukraine. The floor is yours, madam.
Dears, I want to say how a woman and how a mother. I have 2 sons, and at the moment I have a husband. I don't know what will be till the end of this war. Our living is very often in your life. Especially I tell to this delegation that here in OFCA PA have special attitude to Ukraine and don't understand that like rules to the victims, a rule to the murders are different. And when we speak about human rights, we must speak especially about human rights for victims. Here is a photo of a few 9 months child. It is missile in Kramatorsk. And if we want to help Ukrainian women, we need a weapon to protect us. And we need special tribunal that Russia in 4 whole next 1,000 years understand his fault and never begin war in the whole world, never. And understand the democracy values are the main values in this world. And human life, and like women, men, children, have the same values. Our lives and future of this world is your countries, of your government, of every your voting here in OFCA, in your country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Natalia Pipa. And with this is the speakers list ended. I will give the floor to Dr. Heidi Fry to respond. The floor is yours, madam.
Madam President, I cannot respond. I think the last speaker said it all to us. Anything I say would be redundant.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi Fry. We go now to the formal consideration of supplementary item number 14. No amendments have been proposed to the draft resolution on the gender consequences of armed conflicts. Does anyone want a separate vote on any of these paragraphs? No, I don't see so. And now we will go for the decision. Would those in favor of adopting the draft resolution as amended, please raise your voting cards. Thank you. You may take down your voting cards. Would those against the adopting the drafting resolution, please raise your voting cards. Thank you. Any abstentions? Raise your voting card, please. No, I don't see so. The draft resolution is unanimously adopted. Number 3, addresses by candidates for President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. Let me take this opportunity to congratulate officers of our general committees elected this morning. Congratulations. The Bureau meeting this morning to validate the candidates of members running for President, Treasurer, and Vice President. And for the President to be elected until the end of 2024 annual session. There are 3 candidates. First, Ms. Pia Kauma from Finland. Second, Per Joan Pons, Spain. Third, Mark Pritchard, United Kingdom. For Vice Presidents, there are 3 to be elected until the end of the 2026 annual session. And there is 6 candidates. Dr. Daniela de Ridder, Germany. Dr. Kyriakos Argiani, Cyprus. Mr. Pascal Lechamp, France. Mr. Mikita Potorayev, Ukraine. Mr. Christian Vigenen, Bulgaria. Mr. Emanuel Loperefido, Italy. For Treasurer, to be elected until the end of 2025 annual session. There is 2 candidates. Mr. Johan Büser, Sweden, Ms. Farah Karimi, Netherlands. Please note that early voting for members who have an unavoidable obligation to leave began at 12 o'clock and will carry on until 18 o'clock or 6 p.m. Members must request early voting in writing before 17:30 or 5:30 p.m. today. Voting will take place tomorrow between 8:30 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. If a second round is needed, it will be held the same day, Tuesday, the 4th of July, once ballots have been made available, presumably between 11 and 12 o'clock. Let me also briefly refer to the matter raised by the Italian delegation, that is the prospect that there will be a vacancy for a vice president until the next annual session, given that all 3 candidates for the office of president are currently vice presidents. Practice on filling such a vacancy has varied in recent years. In June, the chair of the Rules Committees was briefed on the varying practice and concluded, based on the rules as they stand, that balloting for a vacancy that might not occur is unacceptable. This issue was also raised with the tellers several weeks ago, after which all delegations were informed on this approach. It was clearly not for me as outgoing president to change the arrangement for for an ongoing election. The Bureau met this morning and confirmed the arrangements. However, I propose that the Rules Committee consider this matter at an early opportunity in order that clarification is achieved before the annual session in 2024. The candidates for President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly will now be given the opportunity to address the plenary. I will ask the candidates to take the floor from the rostrum in the order that was randomly determined during the meeting of the Bureau. I would kindly ask each candidate to limit their intervention to 5 minutes maximum. The order of speakers was determined by lot. First, Mr. Per Joan Pons, followed by Ms. Pia Kauma, and the last speaker, Mr. Mark Pritchard. Mr. Per Joan Pons, you are welcome up and take the floor. You have 5 minutes as a maximum. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, first of all, Madam President, for giving me the opportunity to take the floor. And, chers collègues, dear friends, puisque né dans un pays divers et bilingue, je voudrais d'abord m'exprimer en français. Merci à tous et à toutes pour ces mois où j'ai eu l'honneur d'échanger avec des dizaines de parlementaires autour du futur de cette institution unique et indispensable. Ma candidature découle de cette écoute. J'ai bien compris que vous souhaitez une Assemblée unie, géographiquement équilibrée et politiquement forte pour renforcer la sécurité et la paix. Je suis vraiment fier de faire partie de cette Assemblée, d'être ensemble, même si on a des divergences, même en temps de guerre en Europe, après le Covid, on est ensemble. And let me start first with a crystal clear message. In my country, even if we have political differences, all political parties stand with Ukraine. Last Saturday, on the day the Spanish presidency of the European Union took off, my president was in Kyiv, showing to the Ukrainian people the unity and solidarity of all Europeans. EU accession, active solidarity, military support, and prosecution of crimes committed in Ukraine are a priority for us. Today, I would like to address my words to all members present here, but also challenge those who are not here, because their country violate or shared ideal, the multilateral nature and the universal principles of this organization. We will prevail because we are and will be united. But to be united, we have to preserve multilateralism. This assembly is an ideal and an urgent necessity to bring countries together. A necessity because our foundational nature is to be here, all equal and balanced sovereign countries working together to refrain from the use of force. As parliamentarians, we are ambassadors in a competitive and power political world of these two main principles. And when the moment will come, we have to be ready to be part of the solution. We are all here to build peace through dialogue and agreements. We have to be where conflicts are or may appear in order to prevent and provide security and peace when needed. Dear colleagues, my roadmap for the future of this organization is clear. I want to represent you all. I want to be the president of an organization based on multilateralism, president of an organization balanced geographically, of a modern and efficient structure improving our governance, working more in the field, and if we are the first on the ground, our political credibility will grow. I want to be a president of an organization talking politics and promoting, as we listened so far, universal values in our region. So, colleagues, friends, key European and US elections will be held next year. They will be key for our region. The Balkans and Central Asia must be a priority, as well as the Mediterranean. Climate change, youth, gender, and diversity have to be more and more visible in our organization. And last but not least, we have to be the voice sounding the alarm on the state of democracy in our countries. And finally, I share with you a short flyer with some concrete action plan that we can discuss in the coming weeks for my first 100 days, a clear plan to start working once this election is decided. And I would like to underline, for example, the idea of creating a task force to improve the governance, also to have a debate on climate, be all the bureau members in Ukraine, and many points that you can read in the flyer that I shared with you. So thank you, Madam President, and
thank you all. Mr. Pierre Joan Pons. Next candidate is Ms. Pia Kauma from Spain. The floor is yours, Madam.
She's from Finland.
Finland, I'm sorry. Now I'm away. Ms. Pia Kauma from Finland, the floor is yours.
Dear Madam President, I love Spain, and I love Per. Per is a very wonderful candidate as well. Dear Madam President, dear Secretary General, dear colleagues, I decided to become candidate for president because I think our organization is in crisis. It needs shake-up and it needs reform. I want to bring my contribution to keep our organization alive and to make it even stronger. We cannot let Russia's brutal war in Ukraine ruin our assembly. Dear delegates, my country Finland has 1,300 kilometers of common border with Russia. We have been in war with Russia, believe me, enough times in our history for us to know what is it to live in fear. Even if you try to live in peace with your neighbor, there is nothing you can do if he decides to send tanks to your border, to hit your energy infrastructure in the middle of the cold winter, or to greet your capital city with missiles in the middle of the night when you are least expecting it. Dear colleagues, when we talk about security or lack of security, it is not security only for the people of our age. We have to bear in mind the youth and the future generations in all our decision-making. I personally have been lucky or blessed to have 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. My son, who is 20 years of age, just finished his military service that lasted 347 days. My son, in fact, was the first generation of Finns to serve in the army during the time when Finland is a member of NATO. And mind you, nobody in Finland would have believed still 2 years ago that this would be reality for a country for such a long history of neutral status. And that my son and his friends would already today be participating in a very large military exercise, Aurora, in Sweden, together with American and European NATO soldiers, as they did 2 months ago. While saying this, I realized that we Finns have been privileged in having the possibility of seeking security from a large defense organization. We must realize that not all the countries are in the same position. And that is just one of the reasons why we need this organization. Dear colleagues, one day the war will be over, and we will be ready for that moment. The original idea of the Helsinki Final Act was to bring together the East and the West, basically the countries that agree that they disagree on many things. The idea has not disappeared. We must think what is our role among other multinational organizations. Our assembly cannot impose sanctions or send military equipment, but we can offer a platform for dialogue and for peace negotiations, and we can monitor ceasefire, and we can carry out field missions in order to rebuild the societies and democracies. And meanwhile, we must be present where else we are needed right now. Western Balkans, Moldova, Transnistria, Central Asia, South Caucasus, to name but a few. And most of all, we must find a way to reform our rules, such that the country that breaks every single one of our rules and principles cannot go on as if nothing has happened. We must secure our finances, and we must find a way to work closer and get better support from our governments. We are at the dead end, cul-de-sac, kaput, if we cannot decide about anything. To finish, I would like to quote Paul Simon's song, "We need to build a bridge over the troubled water." If I become president, I'm committed to building that bridge. I'm not going to do it alone, but together with our delegations, our secretariat, our governments, and our heads of state. And of course, together with my fellow competitors, my compare. For me, being a president is not who will I be, but rather, what can we do? And what can we do together? Because, my friends, together we are stronger.
Thank you, Ms. Pia Kauma from Finland. Now I give the floor to Mr. Mark Pritchard from United Kingdom. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. This Assembly matters. Our decisions matter. Our decisions may not decide life or death like votes at the United Nations or NATO, but they do matter in giving political weight on some of the biggest issues affecting the 57 member states represented here today, and of course our important 11 partnership observer nations. But let us be honest with ourselves. The international reputation of this Assembly's important work has, shall we say, somewhat suffered in recent times. But I believe this is something that can and must be turned around. The time has come to restore this Assembly's international reputation, to restore our international relevance, and to restore our ability to make a difference. Making a difference to the advancement of human rights, freedom, democracy, and the international rule of law, and standing up for the Helsinki principles. This, of course, starts with Ukraine, but by no means ends with Ukraine. There are other areas of conflict and tensions within the area of the OSCE EPA. But let us first turn to Ukraine. As the United States Joint Chiefs of Staff said this week, the war in Ukraine is likely to continue for the foreseeable future. That is not good news for all the pain and suffering in Ukraine, some of which we've heard just a moment ago. But it is a necessary, timely, and sober assessment of the hard realities of this protracted conflict. Of course, all right-minded people want to see peace and seek peace, but a lasting peace will not come through the denial of the geopolitical realities, but by continuing to support Ukraine in standing up to Russia's aggression for as long as it takes. Ukraine is not the EU's border, as we know. It is not NATO's border. but it is freedom's border. Ukraine is fighting for all of our freedoms, the front line of freedom. And if we learn anything from Russia's wars in Georgia in 2008, or the first incursion into Ukraine, in Crimea in 2014, it is this: that being in denial about Russia's neo-imperialist ambitions endangers the whole of Europe, the whole of the OSCE-PA area, our national security, our food security, our energy security, and most of all, the human security of all of those we represent. If elected president, I will work for a strong peace, for conflict prevention as well as conflict resolution. But that can only be done with a strong and credible defense. This applies to other regional security issues too, as we've heard from the other candidates: the Western Balkans, South Caucasus, Central Asia, the Black Sea region, and increasingly unstable North Africa and some parts of sub-Saharan Africa. But this organization has additional work to do as well. International terrorism, the effects of climate change, future pandemics, the rise in hate crimes, diminution of human and civil rights, nuclear, biological, chemical weapons proliferation, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, political prisoners, defending human security, democracy, and the international rule of law, and taking perhaps a more risk-based approach to future electoral observation missions. Greater transparency also in what we do as an organization. This Assembly can play a full part in finding political solutions to many of these geopolitical challenges. But no member state, whether large or small, can take on these challenges alone. But united, and I say again, listen in, united, we can deal with these issues. We are not a diplomatic body, we are a political body. And if united, we approach
Thank you very much, Mr. Pritchard.
All I'll say is this, as you all know,
No, thank
vote
you.
Pritchard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mark Pritchard from United Kingdom. And by this, we have had a presentation by the 3 candidates for presidency. And I do wish all 3 candidates a successful, fair, free, democratic election. Good luck to the 3 of you. Now let's move further on to number 4. Report by the chair of the ad hoc committee on migration. We now move on, and I will give the floor to the chairperson of the ad hoc committee on migration, Vice President Mr. Mark Pritchard. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. I should have yielded the time for this report to give myself an extra 30 seconds without the clock on the podium there, but thank you. Do you know, I'm going to do something that all politicians should do. There is a time to talk and a time to be silent. I think I've said enough over the last few days in this Assembly, so I'm not going to go through the full report. I'm just going to say thank you to all of my excellent committee members. Thank you to Faramar, our excellent specialist and committee advisor, sat there on the top table, and to our excellent support staff in Copenhagen and Vienna. And also to thank our hosting countries over the last 12 months, the Czech Republic and Moldova, that received us so well and doing such a great job. And to thank all of you representing countries here in this Assembly that are doing so much to support Ukraine refugees and indeed refugees from other parts of the world as well, which we must not forget. So I commend this written report to you. It's out the back, it's online, and it just leaves me to say thank you to Dr. Hayley Fry and the whole of the Canadian delegation for hosting the committee a couple of days ago in downtown Vancouver and seeing the excellent work that Canada does, a real example to the rest of the world. And I yield the rest of my time to other colleagues and members. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mark Pritchard, Vice President and Chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on Migration. I have on my speakers list Mr. Jean-Yves Leconte from France. The floor is yours, sir.
Oui, merci Madame la Présidente, merci Monsieur le rapporteur, même si vous n'avez pas été dans le fond du sujet lors de votre intervention maintenant, je me permets de faire quelques remarques sur votre rapport et quelques réflexions. D'abord, effectivement, cette question d'immigration est essentielle pour l'ensemble de notre espace, que ce soit sur l'espace américain, avec ce que nous avons observé depuis quelques années de montée de réfugiés qui venaient en particulier du Venezuela vers le Mexique, les États-Unis et le Canada, et sur toute la zone européenne et d'Asie centrale, avec en particulier, vous l'avez cité, les personnes en besoin de protection d'Ukraine, mais aussi celles qui venaient d'Afghanistan, de la Corne de l'Afrique, du Congo, de l'Éthiopie, du Soudan, qui ont besoin de protection et qui, dans la plupart du temps d'ailleurs, ne vont pas dans notre espace, mais restent aussi proches que possible de l'endroit où elles vivent les difficultés et les tragédies qui leur font demander une protection. Vous le dites dans votre rapport, monsieur le rapporteur, les migrations ne peuvent pas être arrêtées. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle il est absolument essentiel que dans le cadre finalement de nos principes et de nos valeurs, nous disions et nous affirmions quelques principes essentiels. D'abord, il est essentiel de respecter le droit d'asile. Deuxièmement, au regard de ce que nous avons vécu en Europe ces derniers temps en matière compte tenu des tragédies que nous avons observées à la frontière avec la Grèce, il est absolument indispensable aussi de respecter le droit de la mer et en particulier de montrer toute sa solidarité avec les pays qui font face à des arrivées de naufragés et permettre que l'ensemble des bateaux, sans aucune crainte, puissent sauver les personnes naufragées. Affirmer aussi le respect et le besoin de protection des enfants, le respect à la vie familiale des personnes exilées et faire en sorte qu'elles aient un accès à la santé et au fait d'essayer de les accompagner dans les traumatismes qu'elles ont vécus. Vous le dites, il me semble aussi indispensable, il nous semble absolument indispensable, nous l'avons vécu, nous l'avons observé lors des différentes drames en Méditerranée, il n'est pas acceptable de laisser des passeurs exploiter la misère humaine sans être très fermement en lutte contre cette exploitation et ces trafics humains. Mais si nous constatons que les migrations ne peuvent pas toujours être arrêtées, pour bien coopérer, en particulier pour ce qui est des migrations économiques, pour les personnes qui quittent leur pays pour des raisons liées aux besoins de vivre mieux ailleurs et d'assurer pour leurs enfants une vie digne, il est important d'assurer des voies légales de migration. Et ça, c'est quelque chose que nous devons tous avoir en tête dans nos différents pays.
Thank you, Mr. Jean-Yves Lecomte. Do Ms. Chair of the ad hoc committee, Mr. Mark Pritchard, have any comments? The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. I've got nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Mark Pritchard. And then I would like to thank you as well for chairing the ad hoc committee on migration, and I would like to thank all the members of the ad hoc committee for their work. Thank you. Move further on to number 5, report by the chair of the ad hoc committee on countering terrorism. And I will now give the floor to the chair of the ad hoc committee on countering terrorism, Vice President Mr. Reinhold Lopatka. The floor is yours, sir.
Madam President, Secretary General, dear colleagues, I am honored to report on behalf of our ad hoc committee on countering terrorism. I want to begin by thanking our members for their active involvement and the value continuously added by their work. The war of aggression started by the Russian Federation against Ukraine has brought new terrorism-related risks to the OSCE area. And this war brought to our radar further complexities, for example, in the context of the interaction of international humanitarian law and counterterrorism legislation. With the emergence of hybrid groups, which are both designated terrorist organizations and non-state armed groups engaging in war activities, the relationship between international humanitarian law and counterterrorism legislation becomes rather blurred. Do not undermine the objectives of either legal regimes. It is crucial to understand how the two are actually complementary in countering terrorism. And in fact, all acts or threats of violence against civilians with the primary purpose of spreading terror among the civilian population are strictly prohibited by international humanitarian law. And essentially, a pragmatic approach is needed to ensure accountability of all terrorist acts wherever and by whomever they are committed, including those perpetrated by private military groups or other hybrid groups, for instance, the Russian Wagner Group. And we had today already this discussion, and I think it was a very important signal that we have this resolution now defining the Wagner Group also as a terrorist organization. What are they doing? They use conflict-based instabilities, they undermine state authorities across the globe for political and financial gain, including Mali, Sudan, the Central African Republic, Libya, Syria, Mozambique, or to mention Venezuela. We have to see this, and we acted in the right way. Dear colleagues, but we have also to be aware of new threats: drones, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, robotics, cyber weapons, or social media. All this is used by terrorists, and terrorists especially use social media, and they have one advantage: lies spread 6 times faster than the truth. And of course, our counter-narrative can only be the truth. So what I want to mention is that terrorists, from their perspective, are successful. The number of people killed by terrorists is rising by 26% in the last year. And now Syria is not in the center. It is the Sahel region. It is the epicenter of terrorism. 33% of the global total deaths of terrorism in 2022 were in this region. In 2007, it was only 1%. So we see this dramatic increase of terrorism in the Sahel region, and at the same time increasing far-right extremism also in the West. Today, when we had our 15th meeting of the CCT, we explored, on the one hand, the nature of this Wagner Group and condemned it and its criminal activities. And on the other hand, you know, we were also engaged to prepare our future work. We do it together with the United Nations. The United Nations have here a lead. And we took the first presidency of the coordination mechanism of the United Nations for all interparliamentary assemblies who are engaged in this work on countering terrorism. We will have our next meeting in October in Vienna, and here our assembly is a positive example for other parliamentary assemblies. For example, after us, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe is also now discussing the Wagner Group as a terrorist organization. So thank you, the International Secretariat, for supporting us, that we can do our work, and we will continue as we did it in the last years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice President Reinhold Lopatka, and thank you for your work and dedication, as well as thank you to all the members of the group for the work you have done during the years. I will now open the floor for comments and questions, and I have one delegate on the speakers list, Mr. Antonio Gomez Reino from Spain. And I will give the floor to you, sir. Mr. Antonio Gomez Reino, the floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Gracias, Presidenta. En realidad, yo había pedido la palabra, o pretendía pedir la palabra para otro punto, con lo cual, para el punto final de la sesión plenaria, con lo cual prefiero hacerlo así, si es posible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Antonio Gomez Reino. If you are on the speakers list, otherwise I would like you to add your, to follow the rules when it's to add on the speakers list. So thank you very much. Then we go further on. Number 5 is closed. We have reports on the OSCE PA activities. 6.1, special representatives. And I will now give an opportunity for special representatives to report on their activities. And let me note that several written reports have been made available, both outside on the table as well as in the app. And first on my speakers list is Vice President Ms. Pia Kauma, who is Special Representative on Central Asia. The floor is yours, Madam. Okay, I will move further on the speakers list. Thank you. Next on my speakers list is Mr. Kyriakos Hariani, Special Representative on Civil Society and Engagement. He will be followed by Vice President Irene Shalabidis, Special Representative on Fighting Corruption. Mr. Kyriakos Hariani, Special Representative on Civil Society Engagement. The floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Since being appointed as Special Representative of Civil Society Engagement, I have remained engaged in advocating an open approach to civil society by both the OSCE and other bodies, most notably recognizing the difficulties that the OSCE governmental side has related to NGO participation in their meetings. I have just returned from Vienna, where I participated in ODIHR's supplementary human dimension meeting entitled The Role of Civil Society in the Promotion and Protection of Tolerance and Non-Discrimination. At the margins of this meeting, I had the opportunity to meet with various civil society experts in order to discuss and find ways to further strengthen the work of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in the field of human rights. These meetings serve also as an opportunity to explore the challenges that NGOs facing. Moreover, during my recent visit in Vienna, I had the opportunity to meet with the Special Representative of the OSCE Chairman in Office on Civil Society, Mr. Stokowski. The meeting was held in a very good atmosphere, and I had the opportunity to learn more about the work of the OSCE Chairman in Office in promoting the role of civil society. We have discussed the difficulties that OSCE faces related to civil society, Parliament participation, particularly in human dimension events, and I expressed to him my readiness to support any process leading to a solution if this is considered useful. At this point, I would like to inform also the Assembly that in the context of my appointment, I went one step further by investigating the legislative framework regarding the participation of civil society in various participating states of the OSCE region. I am happy to inform you that most countries stand very well in this topic. Having said this, I regret to say that human rights situation in Belarus is deteriorating dramatically. This is my conclusion from my recent visit in Lithuania, where I met with Belarusian civil society representatives who were forced to leave their country due to restrictions placed on NGOs and activists by the Belarusian regime. I have been informed also that in Belarus, this time at least, 1,400 political prisoners are currently being held, while more than 700 civil society organizations have been forced to close their offices in the past 3 years. I have also participated in several other events with a strong civil society component, assuring that the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly remains a voice encouraging openness and active engagement. This had included my addresses to United Nations forums, to think tanks and others. Thank you, Madam President. I have some other actions, but I will prepare a written information and put it outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kyriakos Hadjiani. Next speaker is Vice President Irene Charalambidis, Special Representative Fighting Corruption. She will be followed by Ms. Farah Karimi, Special Representative on Youth Engagement. Ms. Irene Charalambidis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. I will keep it short. I came to Vancouver from Washington, D.C., where I participated as a speaker in the Global Forum on Anti-Corruption for Development hosted by the World Bank on the 26th and 27th June. I participated as a special representative of the OSCE in the panel concerning the role of the media and the role of parliamentarians in anti-corruption efforts. I highlighted the importance that the OSCE attaches to violations of the freedom of expression and of media freedom, and I explained that this evaluation forms an integral part of missions of the OSCE, of our declarations, and of our election observation missions. Concerning the role of parliamentarians in combating corruption, I highlighted how our legislative and oversight functions can be used to fight corruption. I explained that investigative journalists can be of a great help to parliamentarians, as they can provide information that members of parliament can then use to examine further using their oversight function. I also noted that interparliamentary cooperation platforms such as the OSCE can be very useful for the exchange of good practices. For that reason, I have asked the President and Secretary General of our Assembly to consider the discussion of anti-corruption efforts in a separate session of our coming fall meeting in Yerevan. Cooperation between key international stakeholders on anti-corruption was also a key theme. The World Bank is a key international stakeholder in this field, since it is enforcing anti-corruption standards in its funded projects. I was asked by the World Bank to inform the OSCE about their initiative called the Global Partnership, so that we can consider joining it. All key international stakeholders in the field of anti-corruption participate in this initiative already, including UNODC, GRECO, the governmental side of OSCE, Transparency International, etc. I have provided all necessary information to the President and Secretary General of the Assembly in this regard. In June, I also participated in the Women Political Leaders Summit in Brussels as a speaker in a panel concerning women representation in politics, and I also mediated a session organized by the World Bank concerning the new gender strategy of the World Bank. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Vice President Irene Charalambidis, Special Representative on Fighting Corruption. Next speaker on my list is Ms. Farah Karimi, Special Representative on Youth Engagement. She will be followed by Dr. Daniela de Ridder, Special Representative on Eastern Europe. Ms. Farah Karimi, Special Representative of Youth Engagement. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you very much, Madam President. A written report about my activities was made available. I would like actually to highlight a few points. My report focuses on two key thematic areas: youth, peace and security agenda, and youth inclusion in decision-making process, as well as on the safeguarding of the interests of future generations. Meaningful participation of young people in decision-making process is crucial in the achievement of long-term sustainable peace and development. By involving youth in decision-making, we ensure that their voices are heard, their concerns are addressed, and their aspirations are taken into account. However, young people today face a lot of challenges limiting their engagement in decision-making processes. This includes age-based discrimination, stereotypes, and limited access to information and resources. My report calls for stronger engagement of our Assembly to overcome these obstacles, recognizing the value of youth perspective and creating inclusive spaces for their active participation. During the last year, I have held meetings with various stakeholders and hosted a number of events on youth, peace and security, including the recent webinar on implementation of UN Security Council's Resolution 2020-50. I would like to invite all interested parliamentarians to join the informal working group on youth, peace and security that we established recently, and to continue working and exchanging best practices with other parliamentarians on this topic. I would like once again call all our parliaments to intensify their work with young people domestically and follow the example of Finland in adoption of the National Action Plan on Youth, Peace and Security. My report also highlights the importance of safeguarding the interests of future generations. Young people, as the current generation of youth, hold a stake in the future and should be involved in shaping policies and actions that impact their lives and the lives of future generations. The resolution on future generation that was adopted today in the first committee creates a strong basis for this Assembly to explore the ways how we, as parliamentarians, can contribute to promoting the interests of future generations in preparation of the UN Summit on Future in 2024. And my last point is about the network of young parliamentarians that has experienced rapid development and growth. They actively engage in various formats, organizing meetings, contributing as guest speakers, and liaising with governments on youth policies. This is really an example of success. Their efforts bridge the gap between young people and legislators, ensuring that youth concerns are effectively communicated at the national and international levels. I would like to call all delegates to nominate young members to their respective delegations and increase their engagement with this network. And I would like actually to end by thanking the staff of International Secretary supporting me enormously, and particularly say a big thank you to Manucher Salakhudinov for his invaluable support. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Ms. Farah Karimi, Special Representative on Youth Engagement. Next speaker is Dr. Daniela de Ridder, Special Representative on Eastern Europe. She will be followed by Mr. Oscar Mina, Special Representative on Disinformation, Fake News and Propaganda. Dr. Daniela de Ridder, the floor is yours, Madam.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin. Mein Aufgabenbereich umfasst als Sonderbeauftragte für Osteuropa die Länder Ukraine, Belarus und die Republik Moldau. Ich will Ihnen heute einen ganz kleinen Bericht, einen Überblick verschaffen, verweise gleichzeitig auf die Langfassung, die Sie bitte auch im Internet abrufen können. Als Sonderbeauftragte sehe ich meine Aufgabe vor allem darin, die Ukraine mit konkreten Maßnahmen solidarisch zu unterstützen. Gleichzeitig will ich aber auch dazu beitragen, dass die Situation in Belarus und in der Republik Moldau nicht in Vergessenheit gerät. Und zu diesem Zweck habe ich die Themenagenda des diesjährigen Leinsweiler-Seminars in Berlin mitgestaltet. Dadurch konnte ein Diskussionsschwerpunkt auf die Best Practices der OSZE-Feldarbeit sowohl in der Ukraine als auch auf die Republik Moldau gelegt werden. Und ich freue mich, dass wir 48 Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer aus 12 OSZE-Teilnehmerstaaten begrüßen konnten. Im Fall der Ukraine habe ich eine Vielzahl an NGOs und zivilgesellschaftlichen Initiativen getroffen, sowie intensive Gespräche mit Regierungsverantwortlichen geführt. Im Mittelpunkt standen dabei der Menschenrechtsschutz der Zivilbevölkerung und der Ukraine-Krieg selber. Insbesondere die Versorgung mit Nahrungsmitteln bewegt mich, denn es gilt ja auch darum, die Weltbevölkerung zu ernähren. Und deshalb schlage ich vor, innerhalb der Parlamentarischen Versammlung das Thema prominent zu platzieren und mit wirksamen Arbeitsstrukturen zu unterlegen. Auf meinen Vorschlag hat unter Beteiligung der Klitschko Ventures im Mai im Deutschen Bundestag ein Fachgespräch zum Schicksal der verschleppten Kinder stattgefunden, über das wir schon mehrfach hier bei dieser Versammlung gesprochen haben. Die politische Führung Russlands trifft für diese grausamen Menschenrechtsverbrechen die volle Verantwortung. Dasselbe gilt im Übrigen auch für die im großen Stil durchgeführten illegalen Inhaftierungen und Folterungen von ukrainischen Zivilpersonen durch russische Streitkräfte in den okkupierten Gebieten. Im Fall von Belarus habe ich intensive Kontakte zur belarussischen Exilopposition sowie zu NGOs gesucht, die sich für die Rechte von verfolgten Belarusinnen einsetzen. Darüber hinaus habe ich mich auch in diesen persönlichen Gesprächen mit der früheren Präsidentschaftskandidatin und belarussischen Oppositionsführerin Svetlana Tichanowskaja ausgetauscht. Das Lukaschenka-Regime, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, muss die 1500 politischen Gefangenen umgehend freilassen. Darunter befindet sich auch der belarussische Friedensnobelpreisträger Alex Bialjalski, der erst vor kurzem zu einer unfassbaren 10-jährigen Haftstrafe verurteilt worden. Ich appelliere deshalb, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, an Sie alle, sich in Ihren Herkunftsländern aus humanitären Gründen für die Visaerleichterung und einen verbesserten Aufenthaltsstatus für Geflüchtete aus Belarus einzusetzen, unter ihnen viele Journalistinnen, Künstlerinnen und Wissenschaftlerinnen. Dasselbe gilt auch für die 150.000 Kriegsdienstverweigerer aus Russland, die nach der Teilmobilisierung im September 22 in andere angrenzende OSZE-Teilnehmerstaaten geflüchtet sind und denen trotz drakonischer Haftstrafen in der Regel die Abschiebung nach Russland droht. Ich plädiere eindringlich an Sie, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, für die humanitäre Aufnahme der russischen Kriegsdienstverweigerer einzutreten. Sie ist ein notwendiger Akt der Menschlichkeit, und das sage ich auch als Mutter von 2 erwachsenen Söhnen, der russischen Kriegsmaschinerie zugleich den Zugriff auf die menschlichen Ressourcen erschwert, um den Krieg fortzuführen. Das ist in unser aller Interesse. Und lassen Sie mich schließen mit einem Blick auf die Republik Moldau. Auch hier habe ich mich mit vielen NGOs getroffen, aber ich will noch mal die Gelegenheit nutzen, Farima Daftari für die Organisation der Reise nach Moldau, die sie maßgeblich organisiert hat, dafür auch zu danken. Wir durften dort nämlich erleben, dass die Solidarität der Menschen mit den Kriegsflüchtlingen aus der Ukraine tief beeindruckend war. Trotz schwierigster Wirtschaftslage und hoher Inflation hat die Republik Moldau bei einer Gesamtbevölkerung von ca. 2,6 Millionen Menschen mehr als 100.000 Geflüchtete aufgenommen. Und die von der moldauischen Regierung ergriffenen Maßnahmen zum Menschenrechtsschutz und zur Integration der Geflüchteten ist ausdrücklich als vorbildlich zu bezeichnen. Gleichzeitig versucht Russland, das Land mit Mitteln hybrider Einflussnahme zu destabilisieren. Ich werbe daher mit Nachdruck, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, dafür, die Republik Moldau auch wirtschaftlich und finanziell zu unterstützen. Haben Sie vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daniela de Ridder, Special Representative on Eastern Europe. And I will now give the floor to Special Representative on Central Asia, Ms. Pia Kauma. The floor is yours, and she will be followed by the last Special Representative, Mr. Oscar Mina. There are more special representatives, but they are referring to their written reports. Ms. Vice President Pia Kauma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, it's a privilege for me to present to you today my report as Special Representative on Central Asia. I will not take up too much of your time, but I would like to emphasize some of the highlights of my activities in this role. In May this year, I attended the Helsinki Plus 50 seminar, The Role of Neutral States in Strengthening Security, Stability and Dialogue in the OSCE Area, organized by Turkmenistan. I would like to thank the Parliament of Turkmenistan and in particular its chair, Ms. Gulmanova, for the excellent arrangements. As was highlighted during the seminar, neutrality can be an asset in an increasingly divided international scene. It can help build bridges among states and contribute to addressing global conflicts, as well as other challenges such as climate change and transnational threats. We also noted Turkmenistan's role in mediation, as well as the positive trend of increased intra-regional cooperation, which is developing into a strategic partnership, as exemplified by the annual meetings of Central Asian heads of state. Dear Madam President, in my remarks in the seminar, I raised the issue of women in politics. Although some progress has been made in advancing the role of women as well as young people in the region, there are still some steps to take. As a special rep, I have managed to visit all 5 Central Asian countries. I very much regret that I have not been able to go to Mongolia yet and hope that I will have the opportunity to do so in the near future. While the ongoing war in Ukraine has understandably been the focus of our Assembly, we should not lose sight of the specific concerns and challenges faced by our colleagues in Central Asia. We should continue to listen to their experiences and concerns and support them in their reform agendas through interparliamentary diplomacy in line with our OSCE commitments. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Special Representative on Central Asia, Ms. Vice President Pia Kauma. Now I will give the floor to the last Special Representative, Mr. Oscar Mina, Special Representative on Disinformation, Fake News and Propaganda. The floor is yours, sir.
Merci, Madame le Président, chers collègues. J'interviens dans mon rôle de spécial rapporteur sur la désinformation et la propagande dans cette séance plénière pour une brève référence sur cet aspect auquel nous devons prêter une grande attention, qui ne doit pas être sous-estimé en particulier dans ce conflit russo-ukrainien, qui est en train de produire des dommages dans l'opinion publique avec des effets dévastateurs. Il convient de noter qu'un centre de surveillance des médias, NewsGuard, bien connu dans l'ambiance de la désinformation sur ce conflit, a identifié à ce jour environ 360 sites actifs dans lesquels la plupart des fausses nouvelles nient les atrocités perpétrées par la Russie en Ukraine, en diabolisant les Ukrainiens. Je tenais à évoquer ce sujet car jamais comme aujourd'hui, cette guerre ne se traduit pas seulement par des modes de conflit avec des missiles, des bombes et des chars, mais aussi par la propagation de fake news, de virus informatiques, etc., mais en faisant uniquement de la désinformation et de la vraie propagande de guerre. Et c'est pourquoi l'OSCE aussi doit considérer ce conflit entre la Russie et l'Ukraine non seulement comme l'évolution rapide et dramatique des événements que nous ne pouvons imaginer, mais dans laquelle il semble émerger que ce conflit commence depuis un certain temps, avec des objectifs plus subtils et concrets, à savoir celui de créer un vrai réseau d'information de nature à déstabiliser l'image du conflit dans l'opinion publique. Il y a donc une question que nous devons se poser pour savoir si vraiment ces nouvelles servent à quelqu'un ou c'est seulement un objet de manipulation. Nous nous l'opposons car le danger de la désinformation et de la propagande est en effet devenu une véritable arme de guerre, c'est-à-dire que tout est devenu propagande et tout est devenu contre-propagande, avec une tension telle que malheureusement, entre ces deux pays de l'OSCE, la vraie ou la fausse nouvelle est véritablement devenue partie intégrante de la stratégie de guerre. En conclusion, il faut réitérer que notre organisation, notre Assemblée, doit absolument exhorter les parlementaires eux-mêmes, les parlements nationaux, à ce qu'il y ait un moyen de protéger l'information correcte, tout en garantissant la pluralité et la gratuité de l'information à tous les niveaux, à partir des réseaux sociaux, des médias, jusqu'au papier imprimé. Un défi auquel je pense que nous sommes appelés à se confronter et dans lequel nous devons dire concrètement ce que nous allons faire, car la question de la désinformation n'a pas de frontières, parce qu'elle est capable de produire des effets néfastes de propagande transnationale, capable même de miner la stabilité géopolitique dans la région de l'OSCE et au-delà de ci aussi. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oscar Mina. And I would like to say thank you to all special representatives for the work and engagement you have shown. And once again, reports are available on the app as well as on the table outdoors. I open the floor if there is any comments or questions to the special representative. I don't see so. Then I close number 6. Thank you. And move on to number 6.2. It's election observation activities. This spring, we have observed the early parliamentary election in Kazakhstan on 19th of March and the general election in Turkey on the 14th of May, followed by the second round of the presidential election on 28th May. When it comes to the election in in Kazakhstan, Vice President Iren Charlambidis was appointed a special coordinator, and Vice President Reinhold Lopatka was appointed as head of OSCE PA delegation. I will now give the floor to Vice President Iren Charlambidis, special coordinator, to report on the election in Kazakhstan. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for entrusting me with the responsibility of serving as special coordinator of the election observation mission of the early parliamentary elections in Kazakhstan in March earlier this year. I would also like to thank my dearest colleague, Reinhold Lopatka, who headed the OSCE PA delegation of 77 observers, for his leadership and great cooperation during this mission. In addition to showing interest by participating in this mission in high numbers, OSCE PA observers deployed throughout the country to observe election day proceedings, including in Astana, Almaty, Aktau, and Chiknet. Let me take this opportunity to thank all of those who participated in the mission and showed such great commitment to our observation activity. This mission was a joint effort as we closely worked with our partners from the OSCE and ODIHR, and together deployed 404 observers on election day throughout Kazakhstan. On the day following the elections, I presented our joint mission's conclusions. We noted that the elections were held in the context of reforms introduced to bring Kazakhstan closer to holding elections in line with international standards and OSCE commitments. We found that legal amendments addressed several prior recommendations and increased choice of voters, but that further changes to the legal framework are needed to provide a sufficient basis for conducting democratic elections. In particular, we highlighted that limits on the exercise of constitutionally guaranteed fundamental freedoms remain, and that some political groups continue to be prevented from participating as political parties in elections. While the elections brought elements of competitiveness into the political arena, diverse administrative obstacles negatively affected the quality of campaign opportunities for some self-nominated candidates. Our mission assessed that overall, contestants campaigned actively and freely, but that superficial campaign coverage by the media and a lack of critical reporting due to widespread self-censorship reduced the ability of voters to make an informed choice. Positively, we noted that the election administration handled preparations efficiently and voting was organized in a smooth manner overall. However, significant procedural irregularities were observed and important safeguards were often disregarded during counting and tabulation, undermining transparency of the process. Our full report, which extends to some 18 pages, is available to you, but I will not go into further detail at this point unless there are any questions by our colleagues. Allow me to make the broader point that democracy is a process that requires constant attention and dedication. In Kazakhstan, we noted some welcome improvements, including related to election laws, but Kazakhstan will only achieve the stated political goal of democratic development if far-reaching reforms continue. In particular, greater attention to protecting everyone's fundamental freedoms is needed. Most notably, the restrictive media space and limited campaign coverage did not match candidates' efforts to engage in a more dynamic contest. I expect that ODIHR's final report will be published soon and will include a number of concrete recommendations that we hope will serve as a working basis to bring the country's electoral framework further in line with international standards for democratic elections. As colleagues and friends, the OSCE stands ready to assist the authorities of Kazakhstan at any time in this process, and I would like to thank them again for their good cooperation during the mission. Thank you again, Madam President, for appointing me Special Coordinator, and thank you, colleagues, for contributing to our our observation exercise with such reliability and dedication. And once more, thank you, Reinhold.
Thank you, Madam Vice President Irene Charlambidis, for your report. Any questions, comments? No, it's quiet. Thank you. Let's go further on for the report on the election in Turkey, where Vice President Michael Link served as special coordinator, and Ms. Farah Karimi was appointed as head of OSCE PA delegation. And I will give the floor to Ms. Farah Karimi. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Dear colleagues, I am pleased to report on the election observation mission we deployed to observe the general elections in Turkey in May this year. It was my pleasure to serve as a special coordinator for the second round of this mission and to lead the OSCE PA's delegation of 98 observers. I want to particularly thank Michael Link, who provided important leadership as a special coordinator in the first round to the OSCE's efforts and express my appreciation for the close collaboration also with Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe colleagues. As many of you here, I believe election observation to be a cornerstone of our Assembly's activities and of parliamentary diplomacy. And I would like to commend you for joining the mission in such high numbers. However, I unfortunately also have to note that 2 of our colleagues were denied accreditation by the Turkish authorities. Due to their public and political work as members of parliament in their respective countries, 2 parliamentarians, Mr. Sondergaard from Denmark and Mr. Kasirga from Sweden, were blocked from participating as observers. As a delegation, we strongly opposed this decision. It is unacceptable for a country to selectively choose its OSCE observers. The continued work of our mission was, of course, of utmost importance, and we therefore went ahead with deploying our mission although we missed their contributions and insights. Our delegation of observers deployed throughout Turkey to observe election day proceedings, including to Ankara, Istanbul, Izmir, Van, and Diyarbakir. Our teams were provided with excellent support from the International Secretariat team, whose help was greatly appreciated. We cannot do our work without them, but at the same time, we must recognize that their capacity to continue to provide high-level support is limited by financial constraints. All too often, in the field of election observation, we find that our ability to change things is limited. But this is one area in which those of us in this room can absolutely take action and ensure that our Secretariat has the resources they need to continue helping us with expertise and general support of our work. During the election observation mission, we closely cooperated with the OSCE ODIHR mission, ably led by Ambassador Jan Petersen, and together we deployed 401 observers for the 14 May elections. Together, we worked on preparing a joint assessment of the general elections process, as well as of the second round of the presidential election 2 weeks later. Our joint mission concluded that in the general elections, which we note were held in the wake of devastating earthquakes, voters had a choice between genuine political alternatives and voter participation was high. But the incumbent president and the ruling parties enjoyed an unjustified advantage, including through biased media coverage. Regrettably, we noted that the continued restrictions on fundamental freedoms of assembly, association, and expression hindered the participation of some opposition politicians and parties, civil society, and independent media in the election process. We also concluded that the campaign itself was competitive and largely free for most contestants, but that it was characterized by intense polarization and marred by harsh rhetoric, instances of misuse of administrative resources, and the pressure and intimidation faced by one opposition party. On the topic of election administration, our mission concluded that it technically managed the elections efficiently, but there was a lack of transparency and communication, as well as concerns over its independence. I regret that Turkey's Supreme Elections Board refused to meet with our delegation in advance of the first round. While we noted some improved transparency in their work leading to the second round, and I was pleased to note this responsiveness, much more can be done in this field. We also observed that measures designed to facilitate registration and voting for earthquake-affected citizens were limited, placing an additional burden on the voters to exercise their voting rights. Our mission's observation positively assessed election day as generally well organized. However, instances of deficient implementation of certain procedures, particularly during voting and counting, were also noted. Overall, we concluded that these were competitive but still limited elections. For the second round of the presidential election, our assessment was very similar to the one of the 14 May general elections. We noted that the voters were offered a choice between genuine political alternatives and that voter participation remained high. However, as in the first round, biased media coverage and the lack of a level playing field gave an unjustified advantage to the incumbent. Leading up to the second round, harsher rhetoric and inflammatory and discriminatory language by both contestants, along with the continued intimidation and harassment of supporters of some opposition parties, undermined the process. While the absence of regulation of several aspects of the second round did not provide legal certainty, Positively, the Supreme Electoral Council issued multiple regulations to remedy some of these legal gaps. In the near future, our partners from the OSCE ODIHR will publish their final report on the mission, which will include a set of recommendations to bring the electoral system further in line with international standards for democratic elections and offer recommendations to address the issues we highlighted. We stand ready to assist our Turkish colleagues in the implementation of the recommendations and thank them again for their cooperation during the mission. I very much hope that we can have an open dialogue on all of these issues with our colleagues here in this Assembly and with authorities in Ankara. As our third committee resolution reminds us, democratic and electoral processes are dynamic and require continued work. We should help each other, and I hope we can work together to this end. But the core issue remains: there can be no real democracy without rule of law for all and effective freedom of media. There is much that remains to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Farah Karimi. I now open the floor if there is any comments or questions. Yes, I notice Peter Juul Jensen. The floor is yours, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. And dear colleague, thank you for the hard work you have been doing while you are observing the election in Turkey. I know you as a very fair and transparent person. I know you as a person who are fighting for the individual rights. I would like to ask you two questions. Was the election in Turkey free and fair? And the second question, do you think it is okay for the Turkish government not to allow two of our colleagues to observe the election in their country, even though they invited all of us as OSCE?
Thank you, Mr. Peter Juul Jensen, for your question. I would first like to say we normally don't say that the state election is free and fair. I just wanted to mention that, but I will give the floor to Ms. Farah Karimi to reply on your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter Juul. I think the complexity, I tried actually in my report, but also we as the whole mission tried in our report to do justice to the complexity of the election process, pre-election campaigns, and also the election day itself. And the complexity was so that we said in actually preparation of the election, there was unjustified advantage for the incumbent president and for the ruling party. And that stays. But the election day itself actually showed the possibility of making a real choice between two alternatives. And I think that shows the complexity of the situation. And as Madam President mentioned correctly, it is easy to say it is free or it is not free, or it is fair or it is not fair, but it doesn't reflect actually the complexity of the situation. Therefore, we needed the words and we used them carefully, we choose them carefully, and I would like to stick with those words. No, it is not okay for a country, and I think not to allow the parliamentarians to observe the elections. And I think we were very, very clear in mentioning that. Before we went there, actually we stated that in very clear statement. We went through the diplomatic channels, we were publicly announcing that, and also during the whole meeting, we repeated again, during the whole observation, we repeated again and again that we didn't appreciate this But at the end, as the leadership of this mission, we had to make a choice between whether we stay at home and don't observe, or we go there and we are loud and clear in our observation and in our findings, and we choose the second one.
Thank you, Ms. Farah Karimi. Any other questions, comments? I have got a notice here that head of the Turkish delegation, Mr. Selami Altinok, asked for the floor. The floor is yours, sir.
Evet, değerli başkan, Avrupa Konseyi ile Avrupa Güvenlik ve İşbirliği Teşkilatı'na ülkemizde 14 Mayıs ve 28 Mayıs'ta yapılan seçimleri izlemek üzere davette bulunduk. 14 Mayıs'ta düzenlenen seçimleri toplam 489 uluslararası seçim gözlemcisi, 28 Mayıs'takini de 31 ülkeden 232 gözlemci geldi.
Madam President, thank you very much. We invited the Council of Europe and the OSCE to observe the elections in Turkey on 14th of May and 28th of May. A total of 489 international election observers monitored the elections on 14th of May. For the second round of the presidential election, 232 observers from 31 countries came to our country.
Agitba'dan da şu anda burada bulunan birçok meslektaşım seçimleri gözlemek üzere ülkemize geldiler ve sabah görüştüklerim bana seçim gözleminin ne kadar başarılı bir şekilde yürütüldüğünü ve organizasyonun ne kadar iyi olduğunu söylediler.
Many of my colleagues from the OSCPA who are here now came to observe the elections, and those I met told me how successfully the election observation was carried out and how well organized it was.
Açıkçası Danimarka ve İsveç'ten 2 kişiye giriş izni verilmemesinin sorgulanmasını garipsiyorum. Bu kişiler alenen PKK terör örgütünü ve terör faaliyetlerini destekleyen eylemlerde bulundular. Örneğin bahse konu kişilerden birisi PKK'nın kamplarına gidip orada teröristlere destek açıklaması yaptı. PKK'nın Avrupa Birliği ve ABD tarafından terör örgütü olarak kabul edilmiş, bugüne kadar 10 binlerce insan acımasızca katletmiş bir örgüt olduğunu hatırlatmak isterim.
Frankly speaking, I find it strange to question the denial of entry to two people from Denmark and Sweden who have publicly supported the PKK terrorist organization and its terrorist activities. For example, one of them went to PKK camps and made statements in support of terrorists there. I would like to remind you that the PKK is recognized as a terrorist organization by the European Union and the United States, an organization that has mercilessly massacred tens of thousands of people.
Şimdi size soruyorum ve empati yapmanızı istiyorum. Örneğin DAEŞ'i ziyaret edip DAEŞ'i desteklediğini açıklayan bir milletvekilinin ülkenize gelip seçimleri gözlemlemesine izin verir misiniz?
Now I ask you, and I ask you to empathize, would you allow, for example, parliamentarians who visited ISIS camps and declared their support for ISIS to come to your country and observe the elections?
Ayrıca raportörün raporundaki taraflı tutumu ve Danimarkalı meslektaşımın neredeyse düşmanca tavrını da uygun bulmadığımızı ve kınadığımı özellikle ifade etmek istiyorum. Hayır.
I also find inappropriate some vocabulary used in the report of the reporter, as well as the comments made by my Danish colleague.
Bu olayda olduğu gibi bundan sonra da Türkiye'de sivilleri hedef alan terör örgütlerini destekleyenleri seçim gözlemlemek için ülkemize kesinlikle kabul etmeyeceğimizi de özellikle belirtmek istiyorum.
And finally, as in this case, Turkey will not allow those who support terrorist organizations that target civilians in our country to observe elections.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Selama Altinok. And I will give the floor to Mr. Søren. I'm sorry, I don't remember your family name, but Mr. Søren is from Denmark. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the delegation going to Turkey to protest that some of us, me included, was not allowed to participate, even though we were appointed by the Danish Parliament. If any of what was said is true, that we should supporting terrorists, of course it's not a discussion for a meeting here or for an election observation. It's a matter for the police. If any of us is supporting terrorists, of course, go to the police. It's ridiculous. The reason for this is that we again and again have criticized that political people in Turkey are in jail. And we are not alone. For example, Selahattin Demirtas. The Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg have demanded again and again that he is released. And what I have done, for example, in Denmark, is to echo that support. That political people, they should not be in prison. Political people, they should be in parliament or on the campaign trail. So I have just to say, I mean, you can always make all kinds of accusations. But if there's anything in the accusation that, for example, me should support terrorists, go to the police. And until that, I think that it is an obligation for the OSCE PA, when we are sending election observations, that we respect the decisions taken in the member countries who they want to send. The Danish parliament decided that they want to send me as one of the people going there. And I think that should be respected. And I think that we, at a later stage, must have a discussion what we are doing with countries who say, yes, we want election observations, but we will ourselves choose who we will have to observe the election. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Søren Søndergaard. I don't see any more requests for the floor. Yes, there is. Mr. Peter Juul Jensen, the floor is yours, sir.
Yes. I'm very sorry if I in any way offended my Turkish colleagues and the whole delegation. That was not my aim. I have been to Turkey several times. I think Turkey is a fantastic country with a lot of fantastic people. I just want the best for Turkey and for the Turkish people. So have I offended anybody, then I'm very sorry. That was not my aim.
Thank you, Mr. Peter Juul Jensen. And it looks like that was the last intervention. Let's close the report on the election observation, but before I do that, I would like to thank all the members who have been taking part in the election observation, as well as the members of the International Secretariat for all their work. Thank you. Then we go further on to number 6.3, Call for Action, the Helsinki Plus 50 initiative. I will report on it by myself. This spring, OSCE PA had the opportunity to organize several events in the framework of the Call for Action, Helsinki Plus 50 initiative. I am grateful that the Parliament of Turkmenistan hosted a seminar which considered the role of neutral states in strengthening security. We also met online last month to consider the challenges facing the OSCE itself, including no agreement on who will chair the OSCE in 2024, the perennial difficulties in passing an annual budget, and the need to achieve a difficult consensus on conforming heads of OSCE institutions. On 12 July, there will be another online meeting to discuss the situation in Ukraine. And all members here, and also colleagues who are not attending the meeting, are of course more than welcome to take part in the meeting. There will be more information sent out to the Secretary of the National Delegations. I thank you all for your strong engagement in these discussions. My special thanks go to Ambassador Sanier and his team working on the project Call for Action Helsinki Plus 50 initiative. Any questions or comments? I don't see so. Then we close 6.3. Thank you. Now we are at point number 7, open general debate. I will open the general debate, and I have currently 56 speakers on the list. Please note that the list of speakers is closed. I will limit the speaking time to 2 minutes. The debate will continue tomorrow. And I would like to say, because there have been questions, the first 6 speakers on the list are the candidates for vice presidents. They will get each 2 minutes plus 1 minute additional. I will be very strict with the time limits, both for them as for all others. They will be followed by the 2 candidates for treasurer, and then we will continue on the speakers list. Now I will give the floor first to Mr. Kyriakos Hadjiani from Cyprus. He will be followed by Dr. Daniela de Rieder from Germany. Mr. Kyriakos Hadjiani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for this very great experience that I had to be candidate for this honorable position of Vice President. Like all my colleagues who are running for office, we have scientific and political experiences. All this can be seen in our promotional brochures that we have released. But one thing I can emphatically say is that we were able to create conditions for communication with civil society, measurable results. Measurable results also in fighting for human rights freedoms with statements, resolutions, missions in crisis areas, and never fear of name and shame. I had the opportunity to talk and reflect with my dear fellow parliamentarians, representatives of citizens from Canada, USA, Europe, Asia, and even our very dear country, Mongolia. I finally realized the great concern we have about the course of the OSCE. I finally understood their great worry for peace, but also their fear of the attack that international law receives. The violation of international law as it develops every day makes me much more aware of the responsibility we have as OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. The OSCE is history, but at the same time it must also be the future. We should preserve this organization like the apple of an eye. This crisis that the OSCE is going through can even be described as an existential crisis. The OSCE at the intergovernmental level is paralyzed, and I can say that it is an operational and financial deadlock. However, the General Assembly, which despite the problem it is experiencing, can and must continue to function. This is exactly the optimistic note I want to share with you, dear colleagues. I want to work very hard to the best of my ability in the collective leadership of the Assembly so that we can walk this difficult path of history. I am fully aware that as an official of the Assembly, I have an obligation to work impartially, expressing and supporting our common decisions. There is no ground for selfish attitudes or even the promotion of my own national positions. I will work hard first for the unity of the Assembly, its institutions and people. We should join forces in a time of inflation, war, and environmental crisis. The challenges are such that they require difficult solutions, and for this reason, we should strengthen the respect for the staff of the Assembly. Only with qualified and experienced staff can the Assembly stand up to today's challenges.
Time is ended. Thank you, sir.
Madam.
Thank you, sir. Now I will give the floor to Dr. Daniela de Rieder from Germany. She will be followed by Mr. Mikita Potorayev from Ukraine. Dr. Daniela de Rieder, the floor is yours, madam.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to briefly introduce myself personally. I was born in 1962 in Kiel in Germany, but I grew up in the German-speaking minority region in Belgium. I studied social and communication sciences, and I hold a PhD degree in economic and social sciences. I have been married for 30 years, and I'm a mother of 2 adult sons. Before I became MP in 2013, I worked as a journalist, as scientist, and as business consultant on strategy, personnel, and finance. I became member of the OSCE PA in 2018, vice president in 2020, and I served the PA as special representative on Eastern Europe. I'm also a member of the ad hoc committee on migration. Dear colleagues, the war of aggression waged against Ukraine in break of European peace order by Russia also represents a fundamental attack on the values and principles of the OSCE. We must undertake all efforts to ensure that Russia puts an end to its unjustified and criminal war as quickly as possible. Major challenges must be mastered if we are to secure a decent future. Overcoming poverty, implementing the SDGs, ensuring equal opportunities for participation, gender equality, and intergenerational justice. We also have to seek solutions for issues of migration in order to tackle the root causes of displacement, secure prosperity, and economic cooperation. Most of all, dear colleagues, we have to create positive perspectives for all. Let's switch into French now. Je veux, à cet égard, fixer 3 priorités. Premièrement, soutenir l'échange entre les sociétés civiles affectées par des conflits, principalement en Ukraine, mais aussi dans d'autres conflits. Nous ne devons pas négliger les États membres, ni la Pologne, ni les pays baltes, ni les États d'Asie centrale, pour n'en citer que quelques-uns. Nous devons donner une voix forte aux victimes de violations des droits de l'homme. Deuxièmement, promouvoir des réformes internes qui confèrent un caractère plus contraignant à nos valeurs et principes au sein de l'Assemblée et qui assurent une plus grande visibilité. Et dernièrement, encourager activement l'égalité des genres à tous les échelons et intégrer les femmes dans la totalité des processus décisionnels. Pour mettre en œuvre, chers collègues, ces priorités, je vous demande d'accorder votre confiance à ma candidature au poste de vice-présidente.
Merci beaucoup, madame. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Mikita Potorayev from Ukraine. He will be followed by Mr. Pascal Lecamp from France. Mr. Mikita Potorayev, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Madam President, dear colleagues, dear friends. My colleagues has just advised me to close my written speech and try to speak to you from the bottom of my heart. So, colleagues, you all know that our organization is facing not the best times in its history, but we all believe that OSCE Parliamentary Assembly can be reformed, can reform itself, and can play a new role in building new architecture of stability and cooperation in Europe and in the whole zone of where OSCE is acting. We have potential, we have goodwill. I'm sure that all of you have also strong wish to reform and move forward our organization. And believe us, in maybe one of darkest hours of Ukrainian history, we are thinking not only about our victory, which is coming. We are thinking about our common problems in our common house, in our common European and OSCE house. The war will be ended by Russia's defeat. and we will have to work with another crisis and problems that didn't appear anywhere. So let's don't forget about all challenges that we are facing. Let's work with all our potential. Let's save our organization for better security and cooperation in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bikita Potorayev. Next speaker is Mr. Pascal Decamp from France. He will be followed by Mr. Lomperefidu from Italy. Mr. Pascal Decamp, the floor is yours, sir.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, chers collègues. Je souhaiterais tout d'abord remercier le Parlement canadien, en particulier Monsieur Chris d'Entremont et Madame Eddy Fry, pour leur accueil très chaleureux et la grande qualité des réceptions et événements socioculturels organisés. Vous nous avez gâtés et offert de beaux moments de convivialité et de découverte culturelle. J'adore en effet danser en haut de la montagne et lancer des haches de bûcherons canadiens. Chers collègues, plus sérieusement, je pense que nous partageons tous ici le même diagnostic. L'OSCE est en crise. Il appartient à ses membres de tout mettre en œuvre pour sauver cette institution, l'adapter et surmonter les difficultés. Cette crise politique n'est pas insurmontable, mais c'est maintenant qu'il nous faut agir. Il faut accroître la visibilité de l'OSCE vis-à-vis de nos populations, mais aussi et surtout de nos gouvernements, de nos parlements. Pour cela, une campagne de sensibilisation devra absolument être envisagée par l'organisation. L'OSCE a été et doit demeurer un instrument politique majeur qui doit mobiliser et prendre, ou plutôt retrouver, toute sa place. Les exécutifs doivent lui accorder l'importance qu'elle mérite et c'est à nous, parlementaires, de mettre, entre guillemets, la pression sur nos gouvernements respectifs. L'OSCE redynamisée, réinvestie, emportera avec elle notre Assemblée parlementaire qui retrouvera ainsi tout son crédit et son utilité. La prise de conscience politique doit également se faire au sein de l'OSCE elle-même. Je ne sais pas si cela est déjà survenu auparavant, mais le fait que ni la secrétaire générale, ni la présidence en exercice de l'OSCE ne soient venus ni à notre réunion d'hiver à Vienne en février dernier, ni à notre session annuelle ici à Vancouver, n'était de même pas d'une grande considération pour notre Assemblée. C'est regrettable et dommageable. Ensuite, il faut que la POSCE se focalise sur ce que la plupart d'entre nous considèrent comme sa raison d'être, à savoir la démocratie et les droits de l'homme, et notamment l'observation électorale. Je pense qu'il lui faut ensuite se doter de plans d'action mettant en avant quelques thèmes, sujets considérés prioritaires, et les exploiter plutôt que de se disperser, tout en laissant une place pour les sujets de sécurité au fil de l'actualité. Je pense notamment à l'industrie verte et l'environnement, l'intelligence artificielle, la jeunesse, j'en passe, et quelques autres. Enfin, renforcer le rôle de la PASCE comme plateforme de dialogue ouverte. Soutenir les efforts de l'OSCE en faveur de la paix, évidemment en Ukraine, mais aussi dans le Caucase du Sud, en Asie centrale et dans les Balkans. Cela implique une coopération technique entre les membres des délégations. Enfin, je pense que la présence au bureau de notre Assemblée d'un représentant de la France comme vice-président ne pourra être qu'un atout pour notre Assemblée dans les temps difficiles qu'elle traverse. Finally, even though I've not been MP for more than 1 year, I have 35 years experience in diplomacy in a dozen of countries of OSCE as Canada, Norway, Turkey, Italy or Croatia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pascal Decamp from France. Next speaker is Mr. Lomperefidu from Italy. He will be followed by Mr. Christian Vigenen from Bulgaria. Mr. Lomperefidu, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. President. I was born in November 1975, and after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I would have never thought I would see tanks 800 kilometers away from my home, from the border of the cradle of civilization, which is Italy, a founding member of the European Coal and Steel Community, NATO, EEC, and OSCE. A country, Italy, that since the first day of constitution, rising from the ashes of World War II, understood that cooperation among nations was the only way to achieve stability, security, economic development, peace, and democracy. Italy fully participates in OSCE organization and values with belief, with a competent and united delegation, and I thank the president of the delegation, Mr. Zoffili, and everybody of them for their full support on my candidacy for the vice presidency of the Bureau. Delegation, I was saying, that matched the substantial annual contribution of nearly 400,000 euros to the organization. That is why, in full adherence to the OSCE values, from the very first day of the Russian invasion into Ukrainian territory, we did not hesitate for a second to stand alongside our Ukrainian friends, along with all the democratic countries. We witnessed the violation of principles such as sovereignty, territorial integrity, freedom, and human rights. We have provided and continue to provide financial support for solidarity, aid both in Ukraine and in our country, as well military funding to defend the Ukrainian people from military aggression. So it's about military expenses, but also solidarity and diplomacy, continuously. Diplomacy must be our lodestar in OSCE activities. We owe it to the investment that each individual state finances in solidarity and military peacekeeping mission. We owe to it our soldiers, our volunteers, missionaries, and to people to whom we promise to trust in us for the processes of democratization. We also owe to people working in OSCE who, in these decades of monetary activities, have contributed to the expansion of a group of nations that today can enjoy the fundamental rights recognized by OSCE. OSCE goes from Vladivostok to Vancouver, and I thank again the Canadian colleagues and Mrs. Fry for their hospitality. But perhaps time has come to evaluate a new stage, precisely to ensure security and European cooperation. Maybe we have to think also to enlarge our area to Mediterranean area. What is happening on the North African and Sahel region, Middle East, Balkans, are issues that OSCE cannot ignore, both for its mission and for the
Time
inevitable
is ended.
repercussion.
Monsieur.
Thanks, Mrs. President.
Thank you, Mr. Loperefido from Italy. Now I will give the floor to the last presentation from candidates for vice presidents. Mr. Christian Viginen from Bulgaria. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear members, allow me first to thank wholeheartedly Heidi Fry and the Canadian delegation for their hospitality. We have wonderful days in Vancouver, and the environment you created, dear friends, did help a lot for the success of the OSCE EPA annual session of 2023. We have not completed our work yet, but I say it is a success for three main reasons. We've seen the hard work of the members to prepare and adopt comprehensive documents with strong political statements in the general committees. We've witnessed a meaningful competition of ideas, not just personalities, with regard to the election of the new president. I've noticed the willingness of all delegations present to work for a more coherent and more united assembly. That makes me feel more optimistic now. And yet there is more, something that needs to be taken seriously and confronted in a more strategic way. We're going to adopt important documents which reflect the unanimous or almost unanimous will of the Assembly, a unique assembly. This assembly represents 1 billion citizens of the planet. If you look at the map, we cover the whole northern part of the globe, and we have partners which add further to our weight and geography. At the same time, quite often we show lack of self-confidence and weaknesses which undermine our mission. Our mission is to bring and preserve peace, security, economic development, and respect of human rights to those who have sent us there, who count on us. These weaknesses should be addressed. So I ask all of us, once we are back home, to use all parliamentary tools we possess to press our governments to act in accordance of what we have decided here. I ask the leadership, which we are going to renew tomorrow, not to leave the annual declaration in the drawer. Send it to the OSCE participating states governments. Exert pressure on the OSCE itself. Show determination. We may not have the legal power and the legal instruments, but we have enormous political and moral power. There are people dying in Ukraine, and millions suffer every day. There are regions in the OSCE area under our responsibility, and they're in trouble. I do not want to go back in Sofia and resume the trivial work as if nothing happened in Vancouver. A follow-up mechanism to what we do here is of utmost importance. The organization was designed to operate in a different world. Now, when conditions change, we also have to change, to evolve if we want to be relevant and useful. If we spend months to discuss one change in the rules of procedure and it leads us nowhere, we should ask ourselves the question of the relevance. I ask the future president, Pere or Pia or Mark, and every single member of the Assembly, let's restore our relevance, let's strengthen our efficiency and ability to deliver. I'm happy to help with my knowledge, experience, and
time
energy.
is out.
Thank you, President.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Christian Vigenen. Now I have the 6 candidates for position as Vice President spoken. And I will give the floor to the 2 candidates for Treasurer. They will have the same opportunity, 2 minutes plus 1. And I will start with Mr. Johan Büser from Sweden. The floor is yours, sir.
Dear Madam President and dear colleagues, I am proud and I'm also honored to be here in Vancouver together with all of you for our important annual session. Our Canadian hosts have really shown us great hospitality and managed to organize an excellent meeting with many fruitful and important discussions. At a time when the OSCE region is undergoing its greatest security challenge in decades, we stand strong for security at the most fundamental level. I am proud of the Assembly's comprehensive efforts to guarantee human security for all. The European Security Order is under the greatest attack ever since the foundation of the OSCE. Fundamental to the broad conception of security and stability are functioning democracies. As these are dependent upon a strong civil society, we must defend society's spirit and society's vitality. As we face greater challenges than ever, I ask for your support as the next treasurer of the OSCE PA. Together with the Bureau and together with the Secretariat, my aim is to propose a budget fit for continued priorities that enable us to focus on the work building security and cooperation. Despite a shrinking budget, our organization needs to prioritize the democratic pillars on which this organization was founded upon. We need to continue our interparliamentary work to maintain a dialogue between countries' parliaments. By doing so, we work towards the goal of cooperation between OSCE countries. Here in Vancouver, we have adopted important political resolutions that will make change on many areas. We have also taken decisions on organizational matters, and I welcome that we have actually taken time to answer these questions in order to be in the most effective form when starting a new period after this annual session. During the last 2 years, I have served as the rapporteur for democracy and human rights, but now I'm the candidate, as said before, to be your new treasurer. With your support, I will do my utmost to continue the work in allocating resources to uphold the common values of democracy and security that we have pledged to honor as OSCE parliamentarians. In times of severe challenges, the finances and budgetary priorities of our organization are of the highest importance. I want also to take this opportunity finally to thank Mr. Peter Juhl-Jensen for his impressive work with the budget and his devotion not only to this but also to the political debates. I also would like to thank the outgoing President, Margareta Cederfelt, for her compassion to strengthening the OSCE, as well as all the other people I've worked with. I respectfully now ask for your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Johan Büser. Next speaker on my list is Ms. Farah Karimi from Netherlands. The floor is yours, madam.
Madam President, my friends, my colleagues, over these past 3 days, what I have witnessed in this assembly has not just been unity, but a shared, unshakable commitment. We stand against the chains of tyranny, the devastation of war, and the horror of human rights violation. For some, it may seem like human rights and freedom are just natural parts of life, but many of us know firsthand that this is not the case. My own story is an example. Born and raised in Iran, I fled my home as a political refugee to escape a tyrannical religious dictatorship. I had to fight for the freedoms that so many take for granted today. So when I say I value democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, understand that's not just because they are grand concepts, but because I know firsthand what it's like to live without them. We must remember the forces of tyranny never sleep. They are always waiting for a moment of weakness, of complacency. I joined the Dutch Parliament 25 years ago for the first time, less than a decade after finding refuge in the Netherlands. Later, I had the privilege of leading one of the largest humanitarian organizations, Oxfam, with an annual budget exceeding 200 million euros, working in more than 30 countries. Through a large-scale restructuring, targeted budget cuts, and prioritized investments, we modernized the organization and made it future-proof. I firmly believe that this experience is invaluable in the role of treasurer in our assembly. My involvement with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly is not coincidence. I believe in the power of dialogue, in the principle of human security, and in the potential of cooperation to deliver us from danger. And as we witness the heart-wrenching effect of war and tyranny, it is clear that our organization needs to step up like never before. I am ready to harness my energy, lean into my experience, and stay true to my beliefs to make this happen. We need to be not just efficient, but effective. We must hold on to good governance, transparency, and full accountability, prioritize firmly within our means, and above all, ensure a safe and thriving environment for our staff and our members. Remember, tyranny won't stop on its own. It takes dedicated, courageous individuals to stand up to it. That's our job, that's our responsibility, and so it's with deep humility and a sense of duty that I ask for your support for my candidacy for the position of treasurer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Farah Karimi. And now we have heard the two candidates for treasurer, Mr. Johan Bieser and Ms. Farah Karimi. By this, we will continue on the speakers list, and I will give the floor first to Senator Peter Beam from Canada. He will be followed by Ms. Timea Szabo from Hungary. Mr. Senator Peter Beam, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. I speak to you today as a legislator who was once a diplomat. When I joined our foreign service, I was schooled by a former ambassador who had devoted a good deal of his career to negotiations that culminated in the Helsinki Final Act. I was the note-taker for his conversations with courageous civil society leaders from the Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian SSRs of the Soviet Union, as they then were. What I learned then, and I believe to this day, is that the suppression of democratic values, trampling of human rights, authoritarian governance, and pervasive manipulation of information do not a successful country make. Irredentism and a cynical view of history cannot supplant accords born out of treaties that ended wars or perhaps even peacefully settled boundary disputes. As I listened to our debates and in speaking with many of you over the past few days, I was struck by two things: our collective commitment as parliamentarians to the OSCE and the sense that our organization may be experiencing an existential moment. Colleagues, we are at a global inflection point. Our OSCE can be key to dealing with the war in Ukraine, its aftermath, and in supporting the institutional rebuild of that country. And frankly, there may be other future institutional work to do, perhaps much larger than we can contemplate at this moment. Given the grave nature of the war of aggression fomented by Russia, our need to support Ukraine is profound. We need to concentrate on the moment we are and our organization are in. The aggressor is perfectly prepared to raise this organization to the ground in the way it has flattened Ukrainian communities. We simply cannot acquiesce to tyranny. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peter Beam. Next speaker is Ms. Timea Szabo from Hungary. She will be followed by Ms. Pauline O'Reilly from Ireland. Ms. Timea Szabo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just two quick thoughts. When we are condemning Russia's war on Ukraine, we, as the OSCE, need to find more effective mechanisms to enforce either the decisions or the recommendations made by international organizations such as the OSCE or the EU or the International Criminal Court. When the Prime Minister or any prime minister of an OSCE member state, such as Hungary, states that he does not consider Vladimir Putin a war criminal. And despite the arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court, he and his country will not arrest war criminal Vladimir Putin if he enters the country. Then these countries mock these international organizations such as the OSCE, and he mocks, or they mock the decision, the common values of these 52 countries. As I also said in Warsaw, an international community, any international organization is as strong as its weakest member. So in time in a war, in Russia's brutal war, we need to become stronger. We need to find stronger mechanisms not to let any member states, not only to launch brutal wars, but to stop any other countries to become Russia's Trojan horse and to support these authoritarian regimes. So when we are talking about strengthening the OSCE, we need to find stronger mechanisms, and we need to make sure that these countries that try to undermine the credibility of the OSCE are not successful. If we as OSCE don't reform our international procedures, and if we are not capable of accepting, for example, our budget for 2 years, then we pave the way for these countries to mock ourselves. We need to be stronger.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mia Sabo. Next speaker is Ms. Pauline O'Reilly from Ireland. She will be followed by Ms. Paula Cardoso from Portugal. Ms. Pauline O'Reilly, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I suppose just following on from some of the previous contributors, what seems clear to me over the last few days, and having been in the OSCE for 3 years, is that we are in a period of self-reflection. And I think that that's natural. It's normal for every organisation to go through a period of self-reflection. I think we really need to be very, very careful that, yes, we do need to find better mechanisms, but that we don't descend into something that it just becomes about finger pointing at each other, and instead that we rise each other up, because we are put here by people who have elected us. We have a deep responsibility to take this seriously. We are in crisis internationally on multiple fronts, and this organisation has an ability to really lead from the front because we've been given that authority by those who've elected us and put us here. So that's the first thing I'd say. Secondly, I'd say that some of the side events, and I'd point particularly to Dr. Hedy Fry's event and the gender lunch, have been very motivating. And what's motivating is that, and I looked at the numbers, there's 530 members here, and 160 are women in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. So we're vastly underrepresented women. We're vastly underrepresented in leadership in general. And yet when we went to that lunch, it was pretty much 50-50 women and men there. And I think that that's a tribute to the people who are here, that that we can call people from other genders our allies. And let's indeed call each other our allies, no matter what background we come from, and work together. And I think that one of the great strengths of that lunch was actually bringing in people from outside of the Parliamentary Assembly. Let's do that a bit more, because that is motivating for us. It focuses us on what it is that we're here to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I have just got announced that Ms. Paula Cardoso is occupied by in her capacity as teller, and this means that she is not in the room at the moment, and it's actually 6 o'clock, and the interpreters are ending the day. And I have to close the meeting for today. We will continue tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, and I do kindly request that you will be here 9 so we can start sharply. I wish all of you a pleasant evening, and thank you for today's meeting. Thanks a lot. Goodbye, and thank you.